about something that's pretty deadly. As I was listening to you speaking, and as we've been talking a little bit, one of the things that I found fairly interesting is that you say grand. You say grand in Wales. That's deadly. I love that so much.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's like an adopted thing, but like it might just be a recent thing. But like we say things like grand and I, and it comes from like I suppose we just adopt things from like Scotland and Ireland quite a bit.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I love to. I absolutely love to hear Grand getting around. It's deadly because like I've seen people like from the US and stuff trying to use Grand a little bit as well, which is it's flattering, but they tend to use it in kind of incorrect like contexts. You know, like when you say Grand in Ireland, I don't know, it's the same in Wales. When you say Grand, it's like yeah, fine, bit shit, but it's okay. We're optimistic about it anyway.
Positive against all odds.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas if you say fine in Ireland, it's like, what the fuck's wrong? What's wrong with you? Is it kind of similar when you say grand in Wales? It just means kind of like, yeah, it's okay, everything's okay, but it doesn't have that negative connotation that that fine has, is it?
I think well, it has it's like yeah, things are right. You know,
Yeah.
work was grand, like as grand as work can be. Like
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
our own indigenous things, like I guess like tidy and mint are our own things.
Oh, mint.
But
I haven't heard tidy. Can you tell me like tidy in context, like a sentence with tidy? What would you describe as tidy?
oh yeah, it's tidy. It's like the best something can possibly be.
Oh shit.
So like the film was tidy.
Oh wow. So that's like the top. That's like peak film, best film.
It's high praise, yeah. Our
It's like
film reviews aren't particularly long.
so it's a tidy film. That's brilliant. All right. Well, maybe we'll do a little bit of cultural exchange during this, and I'll start calling things tidy.
Yeah.
I'll take that a little bit, and we'll work. Also, I like that you say I as well. I like for like yes and stuff like that. Yeah, they do it in Scotland. They do it in the north of Ireland as well, which is fun. I'd like to be able to say I, like I as in yes or whatever like that, but I always feel kind of shammy because we don't say it down here. It feels like I'm like
I,
larping.
I'm not sure if it's just like I can't remember if I've heard anyone older than me saying it, so it might just be like picks up from like Scott's Patter Twitter.
Hmm.
But I use it and I know people who use it. So either I've stolen something or it's been here for ages, and we'll find out over the course of the stream.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds tidy. Sorry, cringe. Absolute cringe there.
Yeah, your Welsh passport's in the post.
Ah, brilliant. Harry's getting on. Everybody in chat there. We are live, by the way, comrade. I didn't announce that, but we've been having the bants live, as they say. We are going to be talking about interesting subjects about Welsh national liberation and socialism in Wales and all sorts of interesting stuff there. Harry's getting on to everybody in the chat. I see a few familiar faces. I see Howdy Friends, formerly known, I believe, as Fuck You, which is an interesting name change. How are you getting on? Kai Dirksen, Socialist Swan, how are you? Shinner, Martin Barakov, Socialist Swan again, Zach Pro, Jesse, Hawkless Morty, Temujin. I think I've seen Jessen there, Libya, Maharira. I can't pronounce that. Mahajaria. I can't pronounce that.
Jamaharia.
Jamaharia. There you go. You got it. This is why we had to bring you on here, Owen, just to correct
He
things.
sent guns to your people. You need to be honoring him.
I know. Oh, he fucking did. Yeah, thank you very much, Gaddafi, for that. I do appreciate the support for the Republican struggle. Papi Chulo, how are you getting on? Comrade Roman, welcome back. Good to see you again. How are things? We've got a really, really good stream to plan ahead for this evening with a fantastic guest. I'm still struggling with the pronunciation of our comrade's name. It's spelled Owain, I believe. Is that correct?
That is right, yeah.
Owain. Is that it?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, can you pronounce it though? Because I still feel like a dick saying it.
Yeah, Owain.
Owain, okay.
Yeah.
But Comrade Owain here is going to tell us all about Welsh national liberation, historically, maybe a little bit more modern stuff as well, and the socialist movement as well. So, Comrade Owain, would you like to introduce yourself to the people in the chat? There's a few people, it looks like quite a lot of people recognise you anyway. You've been around, you're around on Twitter and stuff like that. So, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit? Maybe tell people a little bit about your background, maybe a bit about your political development as well, so we can sort of frame the conversation a little bit more moving forward.
Yeah, sure. My name's Owain. You probably know me because I'm terminally online and a professional poster. I'm from Wales, so yeah, specifically the Democratic People's Republic of Blaenau Gwent.
I fucking love it.
There's and I suppose everyone who's born in, especially like South Wales and the former coalfield, is born a socialist and then maybe strays as they get older. But I certainly haven't. So
Class. People
you,
stray. People stray. Is that a real thing? People like the socialism is kind of like a common sense kind of thing. There is it.
I think
Generally,
there
I
is
mean.
yeah. Generally, if you the entire culture, the reason the towns that we live in exist is because of industry and the socialist struggle that comes with it. So I think,
Mm.
and especially as the pits and the steelworks only closed like 40 years ago, and in terms of the steelworks in my community 19 years ago.
Mm.
So you still have people around who are able to reinforce that like trade union socialism to their children and pass it on. So
Mm.
I don't know if that'll ebb with the generations, but it seems to be like when you're born, you are christened into a church of socialism.
Mm.
So
Brilliant.
carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So brilliant. So you were born a socialist. That sort of has been passed down. That tradition of I suppose the industrial. There's a lot of industrial stuff that went on all throughout Wales, and actually I'm not going to give away too much because I know we're going to actually get into that history a little bit later on. Do you want to tell people just a little bit more about your own background? Maybe if you want to mention like your own political work or anything like that, just before we move forward. If you want to, now you don't have to say anything if you don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, sure. So I'm in university at the moment, but for the majority of my working age life, I have been working in pubs mainly, because that's the jobs that are left in the communities that have had industry shut down. And there's massive retreat of workers' rights and industry there. So I've been working in pubs and clubs. And I've always sort of considered myself a socialist, and I was always interested in reading, I think partly because that's what you're sort of brought up in, and partly because you want to be edgy. But nothing really pushes you towards radicalization like working a 12-hour shift and getting home and hurting afterwards. So I think
Fucking hell, yeah.
it's work that you do that really radicalizes you. There's a section of opposed book worship where Mao talks about how like regular peasant farmers understand Marxism far better than anyone who's never worked but has read thousands of books on the topic.
Yep.
Like it's just common sense.
Yep.
So I think that's mainly what radicalized me. I got involved with the CPB and the YCL in my local area, and then in Swansea when I came to university here.
Tidy.
And we've been organizing in our local area to like combat homelessness and try and radicalize a largely student community, but we have a lot of working class adults and people who are actively engaged in labor around here as well.
Very good, very good. That sounds very, very positive. Great to hear. We have a real life communist, and not just a professional online poster. But we like them as well. But it's good to have some real connection to CPB, YCL, and so on and so forth. So brilliant, great to have you on, comrade, and really looking forward to this conversation. I was just saying to Owen before the stream that. I don't know that much about this subject, so I'm here to learn. But even the little bit that I do know, I can't talk about because I can't pronounce any of the words. I can't pronounce the names of any places. I can't pronounce the names of events, historical moments. So yeah, I'm going to be very much tailing and following our comrades this evening, and trying to maybe emulate what you're saying. But let's see how it goes. It's gonna be an interesting one. And for anybody in the chat, if you have any questions for our comrades, please feel free to just pop them into the chat there, and we'll take them throughout the stream. Hopefully about the topic. I mean, okay, we could sit here and talk like for all night, for 12 hours straight about random subjects, and talk about the moon and Mars and all sorts of stuff like that. But let's try to keep them on the subject. Tonight we're going to be talking about socialism and national liberation, particularly as it pertains to Wales. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about comparisons with regard to like Ireland, the Irish Republican struggle. We'll do a little bit of a comparison to Scotland as well, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, just go ahead, and if you have any questions, put them into the chat there at Paul Moran, and then your question, and then I'll know there for us. And yeah, without any further ado, I think we'll get started. That sounds okay to you, Owen?
Yeah,
Owen?
that sounds great.
I'm so sorry I'm pronouncing your name. See, this is what I can't say. It. I can't. I'm revealing myself as a massive dick. So yeah.
I get
Anyway.
exactly the same thing around here. So like, unless you're a Welsh speaker, I don't think people pronounce my name correctly.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, that's reassuring. That's reassuring. Anyway. Okay. Brilliant. So let's jump into it. Let's go ahead and set the scene. We'll talk a little bit about the background of the Welsh national liberation struggle. So what is the background for the Welsh national liberation struggle? We need to talk a little bit about the big question. Was Wales colonised? What are some comparisons and contrasts with the historical position of Scotland? And a little bit later on, I think we might talk about Ireland. We'll compare it to Ireland, but for now, let's keep it on to sort of mainland Britain and talk a little bit about colonialism and all those sorts of things. A little bit about history, invasion, and all that sort of stuff. So, Conrad, take it away.
Of course. So when we ask, well, firstly, we need to be establishing the historical situation. So when we ask, was Wales colonised, we have to ask, what do we consider colonisation and by who? Because there are several people that could have theoretically been the colonisers of Wales. So prior to 43 AD, which is a great start for the stream.
Some people are really curious about. I can see all the questions in the chat. What happened prior to then?
I've been clamoured after to answer this specific question. So, prior to 43 AD, the entirety of the lands of Britain, with exception of the Highlands of Scotland, were Welsh-speaking Celtic peoples. Now, there's some argument about where they came from and whether they were part of like the Celtic culture that spread over, or whether the language just sort of organically spread amongst the population, but we don't know. All we know is prior to 43 AD, the vast majority of people living on the island of Britannia were Welsh-speaking, well, Old Welsh-speaking Celts, which is part of the Brythonic language family, whereas the Gaels and the Irish spoke a Gaelic version of Celtic, which is why they sound so different when they're spoken. In 43 AD, however, the Romans invaded Britain and took control of everything up to Hadrian's Wall. Now, this could be considered a colonization, I suppose, but that has to be sort of answered by someone who is more versed in ancient and classical history rather than me. This could potentially be considered a colonization, but what we know is the Roman Empire then crumbled, and over time, until 410, there was this slow retreat of Roman forces from Britain as they were invaded from their north by Germanic barbarians. During the same time, during 410, there was a massive Anglo-Saxon migration. Those same barbarians that were invading the Roman territory were also coming over into Britain, and they were spreading from the east of what we now consider England into the Celtic-speaking territories. Now, the reason the majority of, especially Brythonic-speaking Celts, now live in Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany are because Wales and Cornwall are the furthest possible west you can go in Britain. They were forced that way by the Anglo-Saxon invasion of the Isles. And some people call this a genocide, but that's, again, an iffy concept, especially when we're talking about 1,500 years ago. It's really hard to gauge whether this was a mostly peaceable or an actively aggressive push. But what we know is Welsh kingdoms ended up forming in Cornwall and Wales, and a lot of the refugees fled across what is now the English Channel to Brittany in France. So the Celts who lived there originally lived in Britain. And this was the case for a good long while, where there were a selection of Welsh kingdoms in Wales. There were some in the north of England that survived but were eventually conquered by Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. And Cornwall was also conquered by Anglo-Saxon kingdoms towards the end of the 10th century, I believe. From there, after 1066, we have a period where the Normans invade Britain and create what is now considered to be England. And this is where England and Wales sort of originate as concepts, because England comes from Angland, as in the land of the Angles. The name Wales comes from the Anglo-Saxon Walas, meaning foreigner. Our own word for ourselves is Cymry, meaning fellow countrymen or comrades to some extent. So you could say the original Celts were based. But the
amazing.
So we have a united England then, and several different kingdoms of Wales. And as the Normans sort of conquered England and united it into one large polity, they also started up setting up marcher provinces in Wales. Because we were a divided country, they were able to invade individual kingdoms and then sort of divide it up amongst their lords. So this occurred, and North Wales was the main holdout of the actually self-governing Welsh kingdoms. Under King Rhodri and later Llywelyn's, successive kings Llywelyn. And this finally ended in 1282, when, after being recognised as the Prince of Wales by the English, the last Welsh-speaking Prince of Wales attempted to unify Wales, fought against the English, lost terribly, and he died. So in 1282, our last Welsh king died, and that was essentially the end of Welsh independence in 1283. So again, we can potentially call this a colonization. This is a lot more. This is a lot more agreed upon, that Wales at this point was certainly a colony. Because Welsh people had laws imposed upon them that treated them as different from English people. Welsh-speaking people weren't allowed in certain cities and hamlets. It was a segregated period of time where you had English castles being built, and the Welsh communities were primarily forced out as peasants. So then Welsh people became the peasants fueling these large English strongholds, which is, and the revolts that emerged from that are part of the reason why Wales has one of the most castles per capita in the world. So,
Is that you're having a little drink there?
Yeah.
Cheers to that.
Sip break. So then you have, ultimately, there's a lot of resistance to this kind of process of colonizing Wales, and there's a lot of discontent among Welsh-speaking noblemen, as well as the regular peasantry, whose lives have changed quite significantly because they're not allowed within larger cities. So this culminates in 1400, when during the 100 Years' War, Owain Glyndwr leads a rebellion against English rule in Wales, and aligns himself with the French, and is, to many accounts, the most successful Prince of Wales there has ever really been. He manages to unite Wales and start pushing into England as far as Shrewsbury, when the English managed to rout that revolt as well and push back into Wales. And Owain Glyndwr sort of disappears at that point. The historical records say that he's last seen at a campfire with his men, and he just walks off into the woods, and he's never seen again, which sort of builds on this idea within Welsh culture of the Mab Darogan, which is the sort of child of fortune, that at some point there will be the return of a figure who is sort of like the reincarnation of this person who has emerged in each revolt against English rule in Wales. And eventually they'll lead an independent Wales, and they'll manage to push the English out, which is part of the reason why our flag has a red dragon on it. It comes from the legend of a red and a white dragon fighting, and the red dragon represented the Celtic people of Britain, and the white the Anglo-Saxons, and the red dragon is supposed to triumph over the white dragon. So
class. We
can certainly say, up until this point, due to English invasion, which was Norman and Anglo-Saxon invasion, Wales is a colony of England. And this is sort of the creation of the beginnings of an English empire, which would become a British empire. which features quite prominently in the later part of the stream, I guess. But until the Laws in Wales Act of 1535, Wales can certainly be considered a colony. After that, though, it becomes a lot more murky because Wales, at that point, Welsh people under the Tudor King Henry VIII get equal status in law, and Wales is fully absorbed into what is considered England then. So in a lot of ways, we can consider colonialism ending then because Wales is no longer a colony. In many ways, it's just a province of England, and everyone in it has equal status in the law to other English people. So that's the position up until the Laws in Wales Act, and that's potentially the reason for that is that the Tudor claim to the throne comes from firstly the Tudor kings are descended from Welsh princes, but don't have much tie to the people they really. But they are also supported by the Welsh people in the fight. And at the Battle of Bosworth, there is a large amount of Welsh archers who famously get involved on the side of the Tudors. And this sort of seen as winning the war for the Tudor family, the Tudor dynasty. So Wales was a colony prior to 1535, and it was a colony after 1282. Before that, it's murky, and after that, it's also murky. And the only thing that any historian can agree on is we were certainly at some point a colony.
So there's at least some reason why there might be some kind of anti-colonial struggle, but whether or not it's misplaced, historians will probably fight on that one. There's a few questions actually. I'm not sure. Do you want to keep going? There's a couple of questions that people have had for you. I'm not sure if now is the time you want to sort of take a couple of those, or if you'd prefer to continue on with the train of thought that you had there, or it's up to you.
No, go on. I'll answer a few of these questions, and then I'll get back to the rest of the process.
Great stuff. Okay, cool. Now, I think we're going to probably address this question a little bit later. But just in the interests of answering the questions and addressing them, Polila Cardinista, how are you, comrade? Asks, I have a question. What is their take on the Free Wales Army? Free Wales Army. Will we come back to that later, or will we touch on that now?
I think we will be coming back to that later, but just as like a cursory thing, I think the Free Wales Army were kind of LARPers in a way, and I'm gonna explain why later on. But I think they may have invented LARPing.
That's so funny. Okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to and to sort of connecting that to like the Irish Republican struggle and all that. I'm really looking forward to having that. It'll be Jesus Christ. That's such a fucking brutal. There's blood running in the streets now already. Okay, so we'll put a pin in that and we'll return to that bombshell a little bit later. Okay, yeah, very good. I'll do one more quick one here, and then we'll jump back into your thought there. So, Nathaniel here says, actually it's Nathaniel, then they say in Italian here. What is your opinion on the loss of Welsh identity and lack of independence support? I'm not sure what way you want to take that.
I think again that is something that we're going to build on later, but I think, unlike other colonies, I think a big reason why there is a loss of identity in Wales comes from economics rather than physical force. Now, that's not to say that the economics of that aren't inherently violent, because they are, but they don't seem so opaquely, well, this has been done specifically for evil, violent reasons. It's a lot more cloak and dagger, the way that the Welsh culture has sort of been degraded over the years. But we also need to recognize that Welsh culture is still alive and well. There is a strong history of Welsh culture in all areas of Wales, and I don't think Welsh speakers can't claim a monopoly on what Welsh culture is, because there is a lot that I think I touch on later that is inherently Welsh, but not necessarily traditionally Welsh.
Well, that's gonna be interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about that later. Um, okay, and just one quick one here. This is kind of just like a little joke one from Socialist Swan. Comrade Swan, extremely based. 07's in the chats. Paul Moran, will Owen be joining Tanky Tube? is this your debut on the Tanky Tube?
If I can find a topic, yeah, but I don't really have anything that I really want to be making at the moment. I'm pretty bogged down with a degree, but then again, if I can earn money, I like money. So if anyone wants to send me money, I'm here to rattle my cup today.
Let's get them shekels.
That's what I'm here for.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
Socialism comes second to my financial well-being.
Oh, I know the feeling. I'm resisting the temptation to do the fucking Patreon thing now, but okay, no, I won't. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for answering those, Con. Really appreciate that. So where were we? We were sort of the late 1700s, were we? I can't remember exactly what point we left off.
It was 1535, the Laws in Wales Act.
Excuse me. This is why I'm not going to say things anymore.
So, at this point, well, to be fair, you don't have to learn it. You've won your rights to not give a fuck about British kings and queens.
Yeah, fair point. I'll use that card today.
That's what the Easter Rising was all about. They were just too bored of learning about dynasties in class.
We'd had enough, yeah. I suppose we're still fighting for independence here, but anyway, that's another conversation.
Of course, yeah. 26 plus 6 equals 1.
Yes! Yeah, that's 26 plus 6. Wait for Socialist Swan, because it's a chat with the 74 county Socialist Republic. Anyway, yeah.
So,
the Empire of Ireland.
the anti-imperialist empire.
Extremely based.
So,
what was that?
After the Laws in Wales Act of 1535, there's a lot of concessions that are given to Welsh people. We have the Bible translated into Welsh, and there's more support for the language to some extent, in that it's kind of left alone. It's, rather than there being any specific law barring Welsh people from doing certain things, it's just kind of ignored and considered, well, that's just what they do over there in the West. So that is generally the state of affairs until the 1800s, which I think I'm going to come on to later, more than discussing it now. But that should kind of give you a scope of the history of Wales up until the main discussion area of the topic, I guess. And it touches on colonialism and internal colonialism, whether we consider a nation that is... We can certainly consider Wales, prior to the Laws in Wales Act, a colony. After that point, though, there have been arguments over whether it's an internal colony, whether it's just a constituent county. Sam Parry makes a comparison between Wales and peripheral states in world systems theory. Now, I'm not clever enough to know anything about world systems theory, but
all right,
he makes a really convincing argument for it, and I'll actually put the PDF of the argument in the chat. Here you are.
Oh, very good.
I don't know if you can actually access that, but we will soon find out.
Would you just do me a favor? Just put a little message into the chat there so I can make you a mod, and then you should be able to share things a little bit more. You should be able to share things. I think it might be filtered out if you're not a mod. Just
I did send the link just now. Can you see that?
No, I can't see the link. Just do like a little 07 in the chat, and then I'll make you a mod, and then then you'll be able to do it.
Okay. How are we looking?
That's a handsome 07.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there you go. Mod powers.
That's
great power.
The product of the sweat of my brow.
Use your power wisely. Spread the good words. Don't put
So
anything weird in
that's
there.
the main argument over whether Wales was a colony or not, or whether it's still a colony.
Hmm.
Um, the main difference that people seem to argue over is obviously the position of Welsh people in relation to English people. We have equal rights. At the moment, we are uniformly equal to an extent. I suppose the position of the language may then constitute a colonial venture in that
Hmm.
there isn't a great deal of support. But then again, devolution gives us the ability to create that support within our own communities. So it's a difficult question to ask. However, whether it's a colony or not, there are certainly elements that we see in the treatment of Wales, especially in the early period, but still to some extent today, that would sort of form the model for how Britain would then go out into the world and colonize the rest of the world.
Hmm.
Which sort of brings us on to a secondary topic within the discussion of whether Wales is a colony. Can a colony colonize? Because we certainly did. We had colonies in Patagonia. We
I
founded
wanted to ask.
Iwladva.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that, although I wasn't sure if I was going to because I thought I might be misconstrued as being rude. But yeah, what's the crack with that?
um, it's an interesting story. So essentially, in the early 1800s, there were a lot of people, due to the rise of industrialization in Wales, a lot of people were moving to industrialized towns. And then that also meant that not just Welsh people were moving to those towns, but also English people and people from the European continent and further afield.
Hmm.
South Wales became, I think Darrell Leaworthy coined the term Americanized, in that it is a melting pot of all different cultures that all become this traditional valleys culture, which I come from and my friends come from, and you can see the influences there. But
Hmm.
a lot of people in West Wales, in more rural, liberal, chapel-going Wales, found this quite disturbing because they thought this is going to herald the end of the language. So they got together and they petitioned, I think, a small businessman in the area to fund their expedition. And they chartered a ship and they went to Patagonia and bought a bit of land off the Argentine government. And it's still there. It's not an independent state, but there are Welsh-speaking towns in the southern area of Patagonia along the Chubut River.
Hmm.
And this was certainly colonialist. This is a colonialist venture. It's not
Yeah.
the same kind of brutal colonialism you can see in like India or something. There wasn't so much
Yeah.
extractive, but it was definitely a colony and
Hmm.
a settler colony at that. And this is not to say about Wales's involvement in the British Empire. Like Zulu, the film, is all about Welsh soldiers going to South Africa and killing Zulus bravely, with as we well know,
Hmm.
with the 15-pounder guns.
Oh my god. Amazing, amazing reference there. Come out, you black and tan. No, anyway.
So you have a lot of involvement in this. There's a society in Hong Kong called the St. David Society, which is set up in the early 1900s by Welsh people who live there. And they have a list on their website of Welsh people who worked in Hong Kong. And there's positions like the Commissioner of Trade for all of China was a Welshman who was appointed by the British government. So there is this deep engagement with a colonial venture. In a lot of ways, people were quite proud of it, and they're still quite proud of it, because we still have museums to the Battle of Rorke's Drift, and
Hmm.
in Brecon there's the Regiment Museum of the Royal Welsh, which has like stolen Impi Zulu shields and stuff on display, and the family flags of Japanese soldiers from World War II, and there's a lot of stolen goods in the university in the museum rather. So I think if we can even claim that Wales was or is a colony after the Laws in Wales Act, we also have to reconcile that with the fact that we not only engaged in colonialism, we eagerly did so as a way of sort of staking our claim on the world stage and pointing out that, look, we exist. We deserve all of this because we worked hard. There's statues in Cardiff of Welsh miners handing up baskets of coal and slate to Britannia, the big marble figure embodying the British Empire. And it sort of shows the relationship of Wales to imperial power, that we weren't anti-imperialist, we were actively imperialist. We just weren't independent in this venture.
It's extremely disappointing. That's very saddening to hear.
I think the line we need to be drawing is, we can argue about whether Wales was a colony, but we also need to be discussing who in Wales was involved in colonial efforts and why. So it's not Welsh miners working 18 hours underground who are actively going abroad and colonizing. It's not the people working in slate quarries or steelworks. It's the coal owners and their sons who are sending people abroad and are able to like stake their claim on places. There are East India ships named Carnarvon and things, but these ships weren't chartered by everyday working Welsh people working on farms or in mills or in mines. These are chartered by the people who own those ventures. So you need class analysis when we also look at imperialism.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to looking at that through these things, through that sort of class character analysis as we move forward. And looking forward to the rest of this conversation. I'm not going to try and pronounce things or ask you questions about what you've said because I'm too embarrassed. Pronunciation, I'm gonna fuck things up. I'm gonna get the dates wrong, and I'm gonna let you keep on going.
This is a safe space for mistakes. We're here to live and learn,
as we've as has been demonstrated, I suppose, all too many times by my countless errors during the stream. Brilliant. I don't see any more questions in the chat there, but comrades in the chat, if you do want to ask some questions, then go ahead and pop them in there, and we'll come to them in due time. Now, so what year are we up to now? I know we talked a little bit about the colony in Patagonia and stuff like that, but was there anything else that you wanted to address before we move on to the next question, or?
I think there's like one, like obviously the comparison between Wales and Scotland is, I think, that's something we haven't really touched on in a colonial comparison, I suppose. But things don't seem to really be going chronologically. We'll just hop around based on theme, I think. Just whatever's interesting.
Well, definitely the Scottish question is very interesting in comparison to this. So let's go for it. Let's talk about it. Invasion versus inheritance, the Welsh versus Scottish experiences.
Yeah, this is the... I feel like it may be a controversial take, and I don't know if any academic has sort of worked on this idea already, but I don't know whether Scotland really constitutes a nation, rather several nations sort of smushed together. There have been Gaels in Scotland, especially in the Highlands, for over 1,000 years, and they had their own kingdoms after the fall of the Kingdom of Dalriada between Ulster and Strathclyde. And they had their own strong Gaelic heritage running back to like their origins in Ireland, but they considered themselves Gaels rather than Irish. And this is where we get the term Scotland, from the Scotty tribe that migrated over during the kingdom of Dalriada, that is. So we have that area. We have the traditional Welsh speakers, I guess, of the areas around Glasgow and down into Ayrshire that don't really exist anymore. They were pushed out by encroaching Anglo-Saxon migration. This is a theme that we're going to come upon. That this is the anti-Anglo gang podcast. But
class.
You have those like Welsh settlers were forced out, and then you obviously have, well, not settlers, they always lived there, but then you have the Anglo-Saxon settlers who came over and had their own language in the form of Scots, which is descended from Old English, at least, which is why it's mutually intelligible with English. And that's again what Ulster Scots is, which is why there's argument over whether Ulster Scots is a real language or just a dialect. But by the time we're getting to the unification of Britain with the Act of Union and Scotland merging into the UK in 1707, but it had been to some extent the case in 1603, the majority of Scotland was Scots Anglo, and they were speaking Scots or English depending on the circumstance, and they were the dominant people group. But you still had these Gaels in the Highlands who represented their own nation, and they were crushed through the Highland clearances, where you have landlords evicting Gaelic speakers and telling them to go abroad because it was no longer profitable for these landlords to own this tract of land. You can't grow anything on it. It's not particularly useful for taxing, so they evict all of these traditional Gaelic speakers, and a lot of them go to Cape Breton in Canada, which is why there's still a Gaelic speaking, like a Scots Gaelic speaking population in Canada. So you could maybe say that the Scots of the Highland, the Scotty, the Gaels were colonized, but the Scots people, the Anglo-Saxon descended English-speaking people, had their own colonization effort against them, and then they merged into the UK. So you could potentially argue that the Scots people were colonized, but they became part of the UK due to inheritance. And no matter how much resistance the working people of Scotland put against it, in like Covenanters and things, you still get this sense that Scotland has willingly merged into the Union. No such agreement was really made in Wales. Now, that is that to say that Scotland doesn't deserve its self-determination? No, it absolutely, it represents a nation unto itself. Its culture has merged over time, certainly into a nation now. People from the Highlands down to Ayr and the borders certainly identify under one nation. But it's arguable whether the merging into the UK was a colonial effort, whereas Wales was actively invaded. We lost our independence at Spear Point. So that is a more cut and dry situation.
Yeah, there's a lot more nuance that needs to be drawn out when it comes to the Scottish question as well. And actually, we've had a question, and now might actually be a time to address that. Rachel 5 asks, Paul, do you too think Scotland will be independent soon? Just on the topic, do you want to maybe answer that before we push forward anymore?
Yeah. Unlike Swan, I'm not going to break democratic centralism today.
You just called him out. Fuck.
I'm acting Swan today. I'm going to report you to your local political
Swan,
commissar.
You've been called out. You're gonna throw down. Fuck. Oh shit.
So I think Scotland deserves self-determination, and the Communist Party of Britain also believe it deserves self-determination, but at present we are working with current circumstances. So the policy we put forward is a federal one, wherein England, Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall are part of one larger British socialist union, but each with devolved power, of course. Now, whether I think it will be independent, I do think it's going that way. I don't think the union is really long for this world, and I don't. If Scotland leaves, I don't imagine Wales will be far behind.
Really?
That doesn't. Yeah, I think. Well, Yes Cymru have been getting 1,000 new members a day for the past month or so because of the handling of COVID from Westminster.
Jesus Christ.
So there is a growing support for independence in Wales.
I didn't realise that.
I think Scotland will sort of be the first domino in that, unless the 6 counties beat them to the punch, which, like, obviously that's not a self-determination issue. That is Ireland's right to own the 6 counties. They are the same people.
Fucking yes, absolutely brilliant, and that's really interesting to hear as well. The sort of the domino effect there. I did want to ask you about your take on Welsh independence and that, and that's very interesting. I will say that I looked it up there, and apparently the polls just as of last month, 26th of November, in terms of should Scotland be an independent country, 53% say yes. This is just the opinion polls. Ipsos polls. 63% want it with yes, 41% say no, 6% undecided. So there's a 12% lead there. It's pretty significant. It does look like it's very much going that way in the future. And I suppose Brexit has some part in that as well. And we can have our own critiques of that, and our own position on Brexit and stuff like that. But that does seem to be the way things are going. I don't know if I'd be able to put any sort of timeline on it. Would you be comfortable enough to suggest any sort of time, like next 5 years, next 15 years? Any thoughts?
Well, both the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Senedd elections are next spring. The SNP will be. Well, I assume they'll probably get a mandate to continue ruling, and that is a mandate for another independence referendum. Now, that becomes iffy when we consider, will the Tories grant them the right to, and will they just go on ahead anyway?
Yeah.
So that depends. But I think once Scotland gets independence, I don't imagine Wales will remain in the Union for longer than 5-10 more years.
That's interesting, yeah. And that actually answers another question that was asked. Shinner asks, how long do you think it will take the Welsh to come around to independence, the next 10 years or so? And I suppose that will be sort of the dissolution of the Union, of the United Kingdom. So, fuck.
I think our politics, so much of Welsh political culture is more about, we're not particularly sure of ourselves as a nation. And I think it will take Scotland leaving to prove it's like proof of concept. Like, well, they did it, so we can too. And we certainly have the resources to. We export, I think, we use half the electricity that we generate, and we export the other half to England. So if we were charging for that, then that would be a massive income. Same thing for water, because we have clean water and Anglos have dirty lime water. So they just swill in their own shite, and we give them the good water, and they have to buy it bottled, whereas we get it through the tap. So we have the basis for an independent state. It's whether there will be confidence, and that's why I think Scotland leaving would have to be the catalyst.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. Actually, on that note, there's another question which leads on quite nicely from that. Comrade Roman asks, what is the opinion on a pan-Celticism, and the concept of a united Celtic republic?
I actually did quite a bit of reading on this on a bus. I think it must have been a 4-hour bus journey, and I read up on everything I could on pan-Celticism. I'm not necessarily sold on the idea that a unified Celtic republic is the best way forward. I think if we're going for self-determination, I don't think you can win people over by saying, okay, we're going to leave and join this other union. That's the problem that we have with independence at the moment, that the main independence party, Plaid Cymru, is also a relatively liberal and pro-EU party. So any critique they have of Westminster, they can just be rebutted by saying, well, you want to move the parliament to Brussels, so what good are you? So an actually independent, a socialist independence-minded party is lacking, and that's what I think. There's Labour for an Independent Wales. They do some good work in that regard. But again, I'm not breaking democratic centralism. I'm not endorsing any of these people.
Unlike certain people, is that?
Yeah, some people in our audience tonight.
Some fine comrades. But, yeah. No, that's actually it's Jesus Christ. The way you're sort of answering the questions, just flowing directly in from one question to another. Because Oisin McNeil, actually I can't pronounce the name of this, but Oisin McNeil says Shumway. You're gonna have to look at that because it looks like Shumway to me, but I'm probably just mispronouncing something. Anyway, Oisin says only just joined, but is there any hope for national liberation under it? To me, it looks like Paid Cymru or Paid Cymru, Paid Cymru as a nominally socialist party, or are they too liberal? Was that the party you were just talking about there?
That was the party.
Okay.
Shemai, not with Arkham Road.
Amazing. So could you just pronounce that again? Because I'm saying Paid Cymru like a dick, and you pronounced it before.
Yeah, the party is Plaid Cymru.
Okay, Cymru.
Cymru is the country. Plaid means party.
Grant. Cymru, that's how you
And
pronounce that. Okay, it's not
yeah,
Simru then.
no.
Cymru.
Welsh is it's a relatively phonetic language.
Mm.
People may then like post examples to the contrary, but it's a more phonetic language than English is. So we don't have K's, we just have C, and it sounds like K. We don't make any other noise with it, save for CH, which sounds like so.
Yeah.
I suppose swings and roundabouts.
Food
But I
and
think you have a
good
similar
language.
sound in, yeah, like food and good. Well,
Makes
there
no
are
sense.
plenty of examples of, yeah. I think you have a similar sound in Irish, though.
Oh
Is that
yeah, yeah,
GH?
yeah. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Chussig,
Um,
yeah. It's like Dutch as
I
well. I have it in Dutch as well.
yeah. Apparently, all Celtic languages have sounds like and they are very similar to Semitic languages like Hebrew and Arabic.
I've
But
heard
it's
that
a
before,
complete
actually.
but they're completely unrelated as far as we know.
Yeah. Aliens.
And unless they're not, in which case Surya la Bashar, we want the Baathist Republic of Wales.
It's the logical extension.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much. We got through all the questions.
Oh
there.
yeah, no, I didn't answer the question.
Oh, did we not?
National Liberation under Plaid
National
Cymru.
Liberation. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Depends what you mean by national liberation. I think you could probably have an independent state, but I firstly I doubt the Plaid Cymru would really sustain itself after independence, because it is relatively a single issue party, and there are very disparate people within Plaid. Like the current leader, Adam Price, is I think he went to Harvard. He's a relatively kind of a neoliberal. I think he poses as a socialist a lot of the time. Whereas Leanne Wood is a good socialist anti-imperialist. She's excellent, and I won't hear a bad thing about her, despite the fact she's from Plaid, and I don't vote Plaid. But
Democratic Centralism.
I think exactly. I think the chances of an independent Wales, if Plaid Cymru gets elected, is pretty likely, I suppose. Like if there's mandate for Plaid Cymru, then there's mandate for independence. But I wouldn't then say that means that we would be independent, like nationally liberated. Like Connolly said, you can raise the Starry Plough over Dublin Castle tomorrow, but the English would still rule you through landlords.
Well, it sounds in some ways kind of like modern Sinn Féin. I think there might be an analog there, which I think is kind of interesting to discuss as well. Because obviously like modern Sinn Féin has abandoned its like anti-EU position. It's it seems to be quite comfortable with sort of buddying up with like EU imperialism, and it has a pretty ambivalent position on on US and actually even UK imperialism at this stage. So yeah, no, I think it may not be the sort of quote national liberation that we're looking for, even if nominally you might get like an independence vote or something like that through these kinds of parties.
There does tend to be. It seems to be a thing in a lot of Celtic nations that our independence party, rather than modeling itself on the history of their own independence, because a lot of them have roots in kind of fashy origins. Sinn Féin doesn't, obviously, but like say Fine Gael, like they are the blue shirts. Yeah. And the SNP and Plaid Cymru sort of model themselves more on European socialist in big inverted commas.
Wow, didn't know
that. They kind of paint themselves. They seem to be trying to put across that they're like the sensible liberal socialist parties that you would have in like Germany or the Netherlands or somewhere more like that. Rather than building off the already existing socialism in those countries, because that socialism is already sort of eaten up by the Labour vote, I think, especially in Wales.
Thank you very much for that. I think we got through all the questions. There's just one quick one here from Martin Barakov, and then we'll return to our main sort of topics from the stream. Martin Barakov, good friend of the show, as they say. How do most Welsh people feel about being called British? Any thoughts about being called British?
I think this is a good time to bring up a political model that kind of defines Wales. There's this model called the Three Wales model that I kind of ascribe to myself. I can't remember who defined it initially, but essentially politically, Wales can be split into three groups. The western seaboard, excepting Pembrokeshire, tends to be Yfro Gymraeg. So that's the Welsh-speaking area will vote Plaid Cymru till their dying day. You have American or Welsh Wales in the south, because that is where everyone votes Labour, and if you don't, you're a scab, and you're driven out of the community with pitchforks. And it's also the area that people identify as Welsh the most of any area in Wales, despite the fact they largely don't speak Welsh. And then you have Mid Wales up to North Wales into like the Vale of Clwyd, and they tend to be like Tory voters, so they tend to be like large farm owners or holiday makers sometimes. There's been a lot of argument over whether our Brexit vote was flipped by English pensioners, and I don't really think that's true. But I certainly think that Powys up to the Vale of Clwyd are predominantly bourgeois people if they're voting Tory the most of the time. They own large farms, they own estates, and they go on holiday here, and then they go off back to England when they've had enough.
And so, with regard to being called British, do you think that the more bourgeois Tory voting people would be more likely to accept it and be comfortable with that, or?
Yeah, actually, I completely forgot to answer the question.
No, it was interesting. It was an interesting insight. So, you know.
So, Welsh Wales would the maps of defining as British or English as both. South Wales, the area of Wales that speaks Welsh the least, tends to identify as Welsh the most. They are genetically the least Welsh. They are ethnically the least Welsh, and certainly they don't speak Welsh in any great number. But we identify as Welsh more than any other area of Wales. And there's something about the industrial culture of Wales that sort of fostered this love of community. So when people say that they're Welsh down there, they may not necessarily be thinking of like, oh yeah, I'm Welsh in the same way as like Gwynfor Evans was Welsh, or like the old Welsh bards were Welsh, because they know that they have an uncle from Durham and their dad is Italian, and you know they have originally Romanian roots or something, because everyone from everywhere came to South Wales to build our industry. And they were all mixed into this community that all relied on each other. So I think when they identify as Welsh, they are identifying with the Wales of Aneurin Bevan, with the Wales of Will Painter, with the Wales of Paul Robeson in a lot of ways. You are Welsh in that you worked here and you put labour into the land, and the land is now yours. And I think that's why they identify as Welsh. So if you said someone from the Valleys was British, they would probably take it worse than someone from the Welsh-speaking areas or the Tory voting areas. The Tory voting areas almost certainly identify as British. The Welsh-speaking Plaid voting areas tend to be a bit more 50-50. They may consider themselves Welsh and British, or Welsh and European, whatever European means. And they have sort of relatively liberal notions about what Welshness is. It comes from this chapel tradition of oh, well, actually, I'm going to be coming on to that later, but like chapel tradition of Wales and what Wales was under the Liberal Party and what it was sort of defined as in the Celtic revivals of the late 1800s.
Brilliant, thank you very much. On that note, will we push forward then, talking about the sort of history of struggle in Wales? Does that sound good? If we talk a little bit about that, I'll talk about like pre-industrial revolution struggle. We'll move on to like labour strife and so on and so forth. What do you think about that?
That sounds grand, but before we do, there is a question from Aaron Nambiar.
Oh, yes. I actually have taken down a couple of questions from Comrade Nambiar. Yes. Yeah, okay.
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't know whether you wanted to answer them later.
Yeah, there's a couple of them here. It might take a couple of minutes to get through them, but yeah, sure, look, we might as well take them now. Aaron Nambiar, Paul Maran, ML from India here. Extremely based. Question: what was the acceptance of Thatcher in Wales and the Falklands War? So that's the first one: acceptance of Thatcher in Wales and the Falklands War. And the second question from Aaron Nambiar is: what was the Welsh position on leaving the EU? So Thatcher, the Falklands War, and the Welsh position on leaving the EU.
Yeah. Wales had no love for Thatcher. our main industry was the coal mines, and obviously she came for us directly after going for the Argentines. So I'm not particularly sure what people thought of the Falklands War, but there is a good deal less military worship in Wales than there is in parts of England, where they're sort of held up as, butter wouldn't melt kind of people, where everything is perfect and there is nothing better than free our Tommy, love our military, wear the poppy every day kind of people. So there was a huge amount of resistance to Thatcher. We hated her almost as much as the people in the Six Counties did. And they were like burning effigies of Thatcher. If you haven't seen the film Pride, I really recommend it, because that touches on this topic. And,
film, yeah.
Yeah, communism
Really
and Wales and, well, not national liberation, but workers' liberation. And the other question was the EU, yeah? Yeah, we voted to leave the EU. And I think that's the correct decision, because the EU is an imperialist trading bloc. And this sort of dovetails with the point I made earlier, where people say that our Brexit vote was swayed by English retirees. English retirees aren't really retiring to places like Blaenau Gwent or Merthyr Tydfil, because 50% of those places are council houses. We've got unemployment rates of like 25%, and they aren't particularly interested in engaging with proletarian culture. So I don't think the idea that English people swayed our vote makes sense. I think the workers voted correctly in the direction they wanted our nation to go.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Woke workers. They fucking get it. Yeah, but it's a hard one. It's a hard one to put across in the context of Brexit in the UK as well. There's often just the idea that Brexit is just like this, horrific, xenophobic, racist thing or whatever the fuck. But yeah, of course, we know that the EU is this horrific imperialist institution, and we need to take a stand against it. So
absolutely, yeah. I don't think that there wasn't some level of there was a lot of race baiting when it came to the EU vote. There was a lot of pushing.
It was spearheaded unfortunately by reactionary forces. It shouldn't have been, but it was.
And there wasn't any way for, the revolutionary left tried to put forward the fact that we are also in favour of leaving the EU, but it gets drowned out.
Yeah.
Now, there were people in the Labour Party who were definitely anti-EU. Dennis Skinner even claimed that Jeremy Corbyn voted to leave. But they didn't use that platform because they were scared of losing votes from the middle-class city people that they are trying to cater to, rather than traditional working-class communities. So if they had spearheaded that, then maybe we could have had a left-wing approach to Brexit, rather than what we did get, which was reactionary right-wingers and the peep of actual class consciousness through it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Speaking of class consciousness, here we go. Struggle. Exciting stuff. Sexy stuff. So tell us about the historical national liberation struggle in Wales, the entire history of struggle. We talk a little bit about labour struggle and some of the earlier national liberation stuff as well. So let's go for it. I think we're going to start with the pre-industrial revolution stuff, and I can't pronounce the name of this person and the rebellion associated with them, but it begins with G, and I know you're going to pronounce it correctly in a moment. So save me from my awkwardness.
That is Glyndŵr.
Glyndŵr. There you go.
Yes, exactly. Owain Glyndŵr led the last rebellion, last major manifestation of Welsh nationalist rebellion, at least prior to the Industrial Revolution. He led an army against the English state that was at the time occupying Wales, and did a pretty good job, because England was caught up in fighting the French at that point. But was ultimately routed and forced back into Wales, and is sort of like a legendary figure that is kind of espoused whenever Welsh independence is talked about. Every movement has sort of claimed a lineage from Glyndŵr in kind of the same way that Irish Republicans have kind of claimed the legacy of the Easter Rising, depending on which branch of the IRA or the ICA they wanted to be founding at the time. So they would, harken back to that and claim a legacy in the same way people kind of do with this. But I've already touched on that. That was part of the establishment of the history of Wales, and that's a relatively well-known chapter in Welsh history. But then after that point, the vast majority of our resistance was class, not national. So there's the Chartist Revolt in 1839, where the Chartists mount a revolt and march on Newport and intend on taking over the city. And then they were planning on launching flares to initiate revolts in Bristol, and there was going to be a widespread national working class revolt in Britain, the first workers' revolt in history as imagined. But what actually happened is they got to Newport and they all got shot. And if you go to Newport today, a lot of the buildings still have the old facades with the bullet holes in them, so you can go and see living history. But this is sort of like the tip of the iceberg in terms of the labour strife in Wales. Since the late 1700s, when it was discovered there was an abundance of coal in South Wales, and the Industrial Revolution was really picking up, there was a real push to go into South Wales and mine for anthracite and steam coal, because it was some of the cleanest coal you could get, and it was especially useful for Royal Navy ships because it didn't produce a whole lot of smoke. So if you were trying to stay hidden as a ship and you were over the horizon, you could burn Welsh steam coal and the smoke wouldn't rise above the horizon and it wouldn't alert people to your presence. So this is another way that Wales sort of fueled colonialism in a way. But that discovery of Welsh coal being some of the best for imperialism leads to a massive amount of migration from other areas of Wales. You have people from North and West Wales coming in, and they're predominantly Welsh speaking, and they come to these communities, and by I think 1890, Merthyr Tydfil is the largest Welsh speaking conurbation in the world, which is a strange thought because today it's one of the least Welsh speaking areas of Wales. So all of this drawing in people from Wales led to people coming in from England, people coming in from Italy, notably. We had a lot of Italian immigration. A lot of our main ice cream brands are of Italian descent, like Sidoli's and Joe's. They're both quite famous here, and they essentially gelato. We have some of the first Chinese immigrants to the UK. And we have people from basically all over the world coming here to work in one area. And what that ends up being a recipe for, time and time again, is labor struggle, because these people realize that there is less separating us than there is between us and our indigenous bosses. So there is a manifestation of workers' anger in a bunch of different revolts. So there's the Rebecca riots, where in, I think, North Pembrokeshire, the local landed gentry decided to put toll gates on roads in order to generate extra income. And they did this on roads that farmers used the most. And most of these farmers were like small tenant farmers who were essentially just trying to, they were effectively peasantry or proletarian. And it meant that when they moved sheep or cattle or goods to market through, they had to pay. And this was an inordinate amount of money for people at the time. So revolts broke out where these men dressed up as women to disguise themselves and went about destroying toll gates. And because they were dressed as women, no one could identify them. And they just ran off into the night. So eventually, these lords stopped trying to institute these toll gates because they knew it was only going to cost them more than they would get from the toll, just constantly repairing them after arson attacks after arson attacks. Similar things happened in the South Wales coalfield with Scotch cattle, which was a process where if you went on strike in the early days of the coalfield and you knew someone to be scabbing, you would go around their house as a mob, and you'd all wear masks, and the leader of the group would wear like a bull's head, and you beat the shit out of them, and it would stop people from scabbing. So you have like similar traditions emerging in South Wales, where it's vigilante justice in a way of achieving working class emancipation, or at least maintaining the settlement that you currently have. So Chartism is kind of like a peak of this process, and then it dies down quite a bit as the government realizes they're going to need to institute reforms that are going to quell union action. So trade unions are legalized. Guilds aren't, but guilds are primarily bourgeois or petty bourgeois anyway. And Wales falls into a situation where the working class don't really have a legal recourse, and punishments for going against the law are quite steep. And eventually, in the 1880s, a liberal government legalizes trade unions, and this causes a massive boost in trade union action. The South Wales Miners' Federation is remembered as one of the most radical unions in the UK, and it comprised the vast majority of miners in South Wales. And it leads strikes for things like the 8-hour day and lunch breaks and the 2-day weekend, or at least initially days off on Sundays, because originally every day was a working day. And it manages to achieve these things through working class action. And Wales becomes this hotbed of radical revolt against capitalism, because it is one of the places that has one of the most harsh examples of how capitalism functions and represses working class people. I think the most poignant example of revolt in South Wales during this time was the Murtha Rising, where I believe it was in reaction to the housing that had been built by mine owners. Murtha at this point was essentially just a huge slum, and cholera was rampant through the town, and there was a constant demand for better housing. But the coal owners refused to allow it. So the people of Murtha rose up. It's arguably the first place that the red flag of revolution was ever flown, and they managed to
Pig's blood, wasn't it?
Yeah, they dipped it in something's blood apparently, but I don't know what. And then they took over the town of Murtha, and when police moved in to like clear them out, they assaulted police officers, or the police claimed they were assaulted rather than them going in with truncheons and guns and terrorizing people. And this led to several of the people who had led the revolt, like Dick Penderyn, being hanged. But these people are still memorialized in South Wales today. So there is this rich history of working class action that runs all the way up till today, but I think it really peaked with the 1984 miners' strike. But the argument then is that Welsh history, at least for the majority of people who have lived in Wales, has been more about class difference than it has been about national difference. This takes a different tone into the 20th century, but certainly in the 1900s, there wasn't a great deal of thought of nation. There was more a thought of class.
Very interesting. It's almost kind of like the opposite, I suppose, in Ireland, where like it was much more. The contradiction was much more apparent, much more intense with the national question than the social question. And you've kind of alluded to this over the course of the stream. We've kind of touched on it a little bit. I suppose there is that sort of element of heavy industrialization, which Wales had experienced, which Ireland hadn't really experienced, with the exception maybe of Belfast, which did actually have a very strong trade union movement, and the class antagonism was really felt there as a result. But yeah, it's almost kind of like an inversion of what we see in Ireland, and it's fascinating to hear about this, and hugely inspiring as well. It's actually really cool to hear about the what did you call it? The Rebecca rebellions, was it? Is that what they were called?
Yeah, the Rebecca riot.
It's like, yeah, it's like because it's like this kind of early kind of like guerrilla warfare kind of thing going on. Like
Hmm.
very very interesting. You know, as I said, they dress up like women. I think they put like mud and stuff on their faces to sort of obscure everything,
Yeah,
and it was kind of happening like all over the place. Like they didn't fuck around.
yeah.
They were serious.
And there's no suggestion that these were like organized in any way. It seemed to be that people would read about other places doing it or hear about other places doing it and then decide, well, we're going to do that too, in order to make sure that we don't have to be charged an exorbitant funds in order to just like traipse cattle through our usual route. Like, this is the place that we've gone forever. Why
Mm,
can they put a gate on it and call it this?
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Very interesting, very interesting. Thank you very much. Was there anything else you wanted to jump in on regarding struggles and that?
Oh yeah, there's obviously the national struggle that came later. I just didn't know if there were any questions that were related to the labour struggle.
There doesn't seem to be any questions related to this in particular. There is a question on George Galloway. If you
Okay.
want to take a little break, or if you want to return to that after, I don't mind. It's up to yourself.
Um, well, we can return to that after because I don't think I know enough about George Galloway. So then you can sort
Yeah.
of wax lyrical on your thoughts if you know
Well,
anything
I
about
don't
it.
have that many. I don't have that many. Well, I suppose that's kind of it. That's what we think. So not much. I've seen some really good speeches by
Mhm.
him, like old speeches, maybe from like the 80s or something like that, and they were pretty inspiring. But it seems that he's taken kind of maybe a little bit of a sort of reactionary kind of positions recently. I think he's I don't want to say like socially conservative or whatever like that, but he seems to have some pretty extreme positions on like gender and stuff like that. And I think yeah, so I think he's part of like the new Workers' Party in Britain, CPGBML and all this sort of stuff. So I don't know if that's actually connected to CPGBML. I know there's some crossover between the two, but yeah, you can sort of infer from that what you will. But yeah, look, some good stuff, some bad stuff. I suppose the shittiest, most sitting on the fence, wishy-washy kind of answer there. Do you wanna give a shitty sitting on the fence, wishy-washy kind of answer with regards to George Galloway as well?
Yeah, sure. I don't know much about him. I know the link between him and the CPGBML is that he leads the Workers' Party, and the CPGBML was involved or endorsed the Workers' Party or something.
Okay, yeah,
So
yeah. I
I
know
think
because
that's
Jody
the
Breyer. I know because Jody Breyer, I think, is in both of them. So I wasn't sure if the
yeah.
Workers' Party was maybe like a front or something like that for CPGBML. I'm not 100% sure. Or I'm not exactly. I don't know what the exact relationship is between them, but there's some connection there.
It might be how they try and do electoralism. Um,
Maybe,
I
yeah.
know, I know they like the CPGBML took pretty transphobic stances, but that then again, I wouldn't like disavow any comrades who are in the organization who are just like that's the best route into socialism. If they feel
Mm,
like that's the only thing in their area, then by all means. It's just I'm not in it and I don't know much about it.
mm. Okay. Thank you very much, and yeah, I hope that satisfies. Those are our thoughts anyway. Very good. Okay, cool. So we've got another question here from Mongoose asking about the current economic situation in Wales and how people feel about it. Do you want to take that now, or do you want to come back to that a bit later as we sort of move more towards the modern period?
If I take it towards the modern period, then I think that would just be more relevant to the flow, I think.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. So the current economic situation in Wales and how do people feel about it?
Okay, so the at present, especially with coronavirus, it's not particularly great. We have some of the highest rates of unemployment, I think, in Western Europe. Parts of Wales are recognised as one of the most like the action areas by the EU where they need to be investing. And they did act on investments and like the college and the school that I went to, at least for the latter half of my school, were built with EU funds. They were like new super schools, but they were built on the site of the old steelworks, which we wouldn't be having these economic issues if we had some kind of work like a steelworks. Like everyone in Ebervale, where I'm from, worked in the local steelworks. It gave its name to every local sports team because everyone was from there. Everyone built into the community was this huge British steelworks, which in 1945 I think was the biggest steel works in the world. So everybody who lived in Ebervale basically worked there or owned, ran, worked for industries that depended on it. And when that closed in 2001, but it had been in the process of being closed for a good long while by then, it sucked any life out of the community that we had. And no amount of building educational facilities on the former grounds is really going to bring that back. Now we're a commuting town. Everyone goes to Cardiff or Newport or Swansea for work, and that's the position of everybody. You don't get that investment in your community because you don't work in your own community. So I think the economic situation in Wales is poor, worsened by coronavirus. I think there are definitely moves that we can be making to progress, but it's not currently great.
But hopefully the CPB and the YCA are going to sort things out pretty soon. Get that revolution going.
The only hope that we have, I assume. But essentially we can just blame Thatcher. Everything's shit. Blame Thatcher. We don't need class analysis. We don't need to talk about like the history over the years of how Labour are involved in shutting things too. No, it's Thatcher. It's fine.
That's good enough for me anyway. Yes, fuck Thatcher, indeed. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Comrade. All right, so let's jump back into the struggles in Wales. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Remember the national liberation stuff and all that kind of thing?
So talking more about national liberation in Wales, there were movements towards the end of the 19th century into the start of the 20th century that supported independence or self-government for Wales along the model promised to the Irish before World War One. Cymru Fydd was led by David Lloyd George, and it was working within the Liberal Party, and it espoused this push towards Welsh independence, but it never really took hold, and especially in the early part of the 20th century, people weren't really interested. Class antagonism was the primary thought on everybody's mind, so it took until maybe the 1960s before people really started considering Wales, maybe we have been colonized, there needs to be a move to change things. And this really starts with the flooding of Tryweryn, which was a town in northwest Wales, which had a small Welsh-speaking population, and it was decided by the government in Westminster that it was going to be filled to provide water to Liverpool. The bill was put before a group of Welsh MPs. Every Welsh MP voted on it. All bar one opposed it, and the one that didn't only abstained. But the bill was passed anyway, which just shows how Welsh interests are just going to be cast by the wayside. At least in this period of time, they don't care. So they dam the village and they flood it, and they have to obviously move everybody out. And there's massive unrest regarding this. There are protests against the flooding of Tryweryn across Wales, and there really seems to be like a national awakening around the flooding of Tryweryn, which hasn't really gone away. The flooding of Tryweryn is kind of like the catalyst for the starting of the modern Welsh independence movement. Now, this happens in 1965, and to give scope, in order to try and get people back invested in Britain as a project, they've already organised Prince Charles to be invested as Prince of Wales in 1969 in Caernarfon, in the heart of Welsh-speaking Wales. They've never done this before since the 1200s, and they just decided to do it now. And we can only assume the attempt was to try and draw people back into the Union, to encourage people to think of themselves as British, not just Welsh. Yeah.
Mm.
But even that doesn't go off particularly with a hitch, because Mudiad am Ddiffyn Cymru sets off bombs around the investiture ground. There's 2 people who are killed setting up a bomb on the railway track to prevent the train from coming into Carnarvon carrying the royal family, and they're referred to as the Abigail Martyrs. And going into this later period, we can see that a lot of the manifestation of like physical force Welsh independence activism takes the form of blowing up infrastructure. We really seem to like blowing up pylons and railway tracks and pipes.
Class.
There's never an attempt to like harm people. There always seems to be like, I'm going to cut off my nose to spite my face. If you're broadcasting no Welsh language television, I'm going to blow up this radio antenna.
Well, I mean, it's kind of, I suppose, thoughtful. You know, you're not gonna have that many civilian deaths or anything like that. So, you know, that's if you're gonna blow up something.
There's definitely this idea within the independence movement that the target is the state and not the people, obviously.
Yeah.
So this seems to occur again and again. You have instances where Welsh people feel, or at least Welsh-speaking Welsh people feel maligned, and then they attack a figure of infrastructure. For instance, there was a refusal by the British government during the 1960s and 70s to put the Welsh language on road signs. So Cymdeithas yr Iaith Cymraeg went around tearing down the road signs and then delivered them all to the Welsh office and just like piled them up on the floor, meaning that the signs were already torn down, so then if you're going to replace them, you may as well put Welsh on them now anyway. So these actions are relatively productive. You manage to achieve something by it. In the case of Tryweryn, there's Mudiad am Ddiffyn Cymru again blowing up pipelines that are leading from the Tryweryn Dam to Liverpool to cut off the water supply. Obviously, that's not going to last long, but it's giving people a sense of the anger in these communities at how they've been maligned and disregarded. In the 1970s, we have a devolution referendum on whether we would want a devolved Parliament for Wales, and we reject it outright. Like 4/5 of the population do, and there are lots of arguments for why. But it did also come at a time of a massive financial crisis with the OPEC crisis. So it's argued that maybe people were shy about distancing themselves from Westminster when things were going so poorly. They didn't want things to get worse. But obviously that debate is still open, and if anyone has opinions, I'd be interested to hear them. But this trend continues. You have the growth of parties like Plaid Cymru, who get their first elected MP, Gwynfor Evans, in Carmarthenshire. Sorry. You have bombings of radio towers because, well, I'll find out the election now. In 1979, both the Conservative Party and Labour promised to create a Welsh language television channel. And then when the Conservatives won, they completely reneged on the promise. So people went around bombing radio towers as revolt against this. And eventually and I think Gwynfor Evans threatened to go on hunger strike for it or something. And then the Tories reneged on the reneging and created S4C or S4C, which is now the Welsh language TV channel that you can probably access anywhere in Britain. But I don't know because I live here. So, so there is this trend of physical force Welsh independence activism.
Were they? Excuse me. Can I just ask? Were they calling themselves Republicans at this stage? Was this part like I know because I know socialist republicanism was kind of a thing in Wales at different points. Would they have sort of fallen under the banner of like Welsh Socialist Republican or anything like that, or?
Some of them were. So the Welsh Socialist Republican movement actively called themselves Republicans. These were in the late 70s and early 80s, and they were I can't remember if he was a leader or if he was just a prominent member, but Rob Griffiths, the current leader of the Communist Party of Britain, was in this movement. And it was he talked about this on Desolation Radio, which is a podcast about left-wing Welsh politics, where he discusses how the movement itself didn't particularly have many clear aims. They were just doing a lot of like marches and leafleting. So he described it as kind of idealist, and it was in a large part based off the romanticism of the Irish Republican struggle, which we're going to get onto later. But it ended when a bunch of the leadership were arrested on trumped up charges. I think there had been a murder or like a spate of robberies or something that was completely unrelated that they were trying to pin on the leadership to try and dissolve the movement. And he has this great interview where he talks about how South Wales police had invented testimony from him. They had just like made up his confession. But in his confession that they had written, they said about a Marxist-Leninist that he had said, "We want Wales to have its own independent republic, just like France and the United States." So they clearly don't understand the movement that they're trying to dissolve. And it's completely, it's thrown out of court. It's a joke. But after this, obviously, there's a lot of people don't really want to be involved with a movement where there have been several arrests, and they don't want to like ruin their lives for something they just see as like, they're just playing politics. So they cease and desist, and dissolve essentially, but that doesn't mean that physical force republicanism doesn't carry on. Like maybe on Glyndŵr existed into the 80s and the 90s, and they were never caught, and their whole thing was burning down holiday homes because they thought that homes in North Wales where English people were coming to like stay for 2 weeks of the year and then go back home should belong to Welsh people. I don't know if it's particularly productive to burn them down rather than squatting in them, but they did their own thing. And there is this tendency of we do have a physical force movement in Welsh history, and this is kind of why I wanted to do the stream, is because whenever talk of the IRA is brought up, people would ask, "Oh, is there a similar movement for Scotland or Wales?" And my answer would be like, kind of. So this is what I mean by kind of, in that it's we blew stuff up, but it wasn't really a people's war in the same way that the Troubles in Northern Ireland were, and there was a very different background to the situation that could potentially render these actions potentially unwarranted depending on their situation. So if like there were people who were harmed during these processes, and whether it's right to harm someone extremely badly in order to get a Welsh language television channel is another question to whether it's right to harm someone in order to liberate your nation. So that's something you would have to sort of pass.
Yeah, it's very interesting, very interesting. And I'd be interested to hear sort of more modern iterations of that as well. I'm not sure if you want to take a couple of questions while we're here, or if you wanted to push on. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, Aaron Nambier asks, was any solidarity developed between Welsh and Scottish independence movements? That's an interesting one. We kind of touched a little bit.
Plaid Cymru and the SNP have a very close relationship. I know that there are lots of SNP MPs who are also members of Plaid Cymru in like an honorary position. So I think they have a relatively close relationship. When it came to the more violent Republican and independence movements, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of links. But then I'm not sure whether Scotland had many actually physical force Republican movements for themselves, or whether things panned out in a mostly legal way. So in terms of Plaid Cymru and the SNP, yes. In terms of more underground organisations, I'm not quite sure.
Thank you very much. Very good. There's another question, just a quick one there from Chinner asks, Paul, what is your degree at uni? College, let me say here. I studied English and music, so complete fucking waste of time degree. That got me nothing. It's fucked. I took a load of modules and a load of different things, a load of topics. But yeah, it didn't get me anywhere. So yeah. Quite embarrassed about that. But anyway, that happened. So yeah.
This is the humiliation stream. I'm going to come out here and humiliate myself in whatever way I can by listing my qualifications.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I just was making a complete dick of myself tonight. I started stream drinking fucking Heineken. Don't drink Heineken, kids.
Oh, no, that's making a dick of yourself even more.
Fucking hell. That was the first crucial error. And it all just went wrong there. The dominoes. You were talking about dominoes earlier on. Falling over. Yeah, that was it. Drinking Heineken was the start of it all. Anyway, alright, save me. Okay, let's go. We're gonna push back into liberation struggles. Talk a little bit about modern violent opposition, and we can talk a little bit about the modern national liberation struggle in Wales. A few more things. Is there anything else there that you want to really highlight before we push forward, or?
Oh yeah, I didn't mention in 1997 we had a devolution referendum, and we got devolution. So and the strongest areas, like the biggest block to vote for devolution, were Labour areas, despite the fact that historically Labour had been very anti-devolution. So that's it's not really Welsh-speaking areas that can sort of claim this legacy of getting independent bodies for Wales. You have a lot within the Labour struggle as well.
Very good, very good. Thank you.
So in terms of the modern national liberation struggle, yeah?
Yes, please.
Yep. So the modern struggle, as far as I'm aware, well, the people who were burning down holiday homes were never caught. So we could still consider maybe on Glyndŵr an active movement, but we don't know where they are or what they're doing. They're probably quite old now because it was 40 years ago. So they're probably enjoying their pension, or maybe in a retirement home, enjoying their twilight years, I would imagine. But
in a holiday home.
Yeah, exactly. The devolution referendum in 1997 kind of marks an end of physical force Welsh republicanism. Obviously, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. There's certainly been a resurgence of interest in national liberation recently. Since, I think, the Brexit referendum, there's been a growth in a sense of national liberation. And I'm not really sure whether that's from people who want to overturn the referendum. Certainly that's the case with Plaid Cymru. But a lot of the people who support independence would have also voted for Brexit in Labour voting areas. So it might be that you've heard the rhetoric about getting independence from the EU. Does this also apply to Westminster? Can we have, a better say over our own affairs? If it works for Britain, why doesn't it work for Wales? But the current Welsh national liberation struggle are characterised by four main organisations. There's Plaid Cymru, Cymdeithas, Yes Cymru, and Undod. Now, Plaid Cymru is the only one of those that runs in elections. It's the main nationalist party in Wales, and it claims socialism, but the actual policy are kind of milquetoast European liberal kind of policies. They've had a long history, and they've been fielding candidates for a long time. They've built up a rapport in the areas that they hold quite strongly, like Ceredigion and Carmarthen, but they aren't a particularly radical movement. Cymdeithas is more so. They are specifically geared towards protecting the language, and their interests are specifically in creating more Welsh language institutions. They were the ones who were primarily tearing down English language road signs in order to get Welsh ones. And they spearheaded the campaign for S4C, the Welsh language channel. Yes Cymru is a movement which is it's basically Yes Scotland, where you have a huge amount of people whose single issue is getting a referendum on the table. And whatever the internal politics is, like you probably have Tories, you have Labour supporters, you have Plaid supporters, obviously. And the main thing is getting a referendum on independence. Indod, I'd really like to promote, because I don't think there's a lot of discourse around them. They are actual socialist Welsh independence activists. They are relatively small. They do a lot of meetings online now because the transport links in Wales are terrible. Even prior to COVID, people couldn't see each other. But they are mainly based in North Wales, and if you're in that area, I think engaging with this stuff is very good. They have a good line on colonialism. They discuss the effects of industrialization on the Welsh language, and I think they're a pretty good organization.
Very good, very good. Didn't break democratic centralism, I hope, to
not at all
recommend them. Very good, brilliant. Thank you very much, comrade. Fantastic. Couple of questions here. Aaron, a lot of good questions from Aaron Lambier tonight. Asks, apart from Labour, are there any other Fabian socialist movements left?
I don't know, actually. When you say Fabian socialist, do you mean like birthed out of the Fabian society, or do you mean in that tradition? Because if you mean in that tradition, I don't really think so, or at least none that I'm aware of. People who are more directly involved with the Labour Party would know, but like the group within the Labour Party that really carries on that tradition of the Fabian Society is primarily the Socialist Campaign Group, which has Jeremy Corbyn, Beth Winter, John McDonnell, and a bunch of the new people who were brought into the party by that movement. So I think if you're interested in Fabian socialism, that's probably the area to look into. But save for that, I'm not really well versed on the democratic route to power.
Thank you very much. Good stuff. And another question from Sunflower Socialist here. How strong is the far right in Wales?
I don't think particularly strong at all, really, which is good news. We shouldn't ever underestimate them. I think the biggest far right presence we've ever really had has been in where I am now, which is Swansea. And it was mainly based around football, where you had people from the National Front who also supported Swansea Football Club. But I don't even think that's particularly popular. Like, the main rivalry in football in South Wales is between Swansea and Cardiff have properly leaned into the fact that they aren't the Nazi club. So they're properly doing like the refugees welcome here, the sticker bombing places. They are much more like teams like Celtic or St. Pauli. Swansea's kind of lost its far-right identity, and all it does now is the team occasionally wishes a happy birthday to the Royals, and then the entire fandom of the Cardiff City team comes on and rages about it. But there doesn't seem to be much of a presence. There was a NF like stall, I think, in Swansea town centre that was supposed to be like the entire Welsh branch of the National Front. And it was like 5 people, and 3 of them were in their 60s, and 2 of them were these really fat twins with NF flag tattoos. So I don't think they're much of a threat. We shouldn't underestimate them, but it does seem like it's a holdover from football hooliganism, and we've never really had far-right politics. We've had liberal Welsh speakers and revolutionary socialist workers.
Class. Love to hear it. Love to hear it. A very important question next from 4Rachel5. What are your 2 favourite beers? So what's your favourite beer? On the spot now.
Oh, fuck. It depends on my budget. I like Cwrw Haf. Thomas Watkin make a beer called Cwrw Haf, and I like that. But I also like Red Stripe. You go.
Very good. Guinness. Well, stout, but fucking Guinness, absolutely. I'm a fucking stereotype. It's very much budget very much informed by budgetary situations as well, because Guinness is quite cheap here. So yeah,
Oh, it costs an arm and a leg over here. You pay an extra
yeah.
50p for a pint, yeah?
Oh, what a joke! Yeah, it used to
I
be
know.
like when I was in college, it was like £3. It was like £3 for a Guinness, and it'd be like £5 for a normal pint or something else. So yeah,
Jesus.
yeah, it very quickly became my favorite. So yeah, that's it. But I don't really drink that much beer, so I mostly drink vodka because I don't get hangovers from it for some reason, which is
It's more efficient too. You
pragmatic.
get where
Yeah.
you're going quicker.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like high-speed rail.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Okay, cool. Let's jump back in. Okay, so anything else now on sort of modern struggle, modern areas of struggle, national liberation, or even labour struggle or anything like that? Do you want to talk? Do you want to talk about the rest of that, and then we can push forward?
Yeah, the current situation in Wales, it's actually looking pretty optimistic. Our First Minister, I know Mark Drakeford gets a lot of shit, but he does come from the socialist wing of the Labour Party, and you can kind of see that in a lot of what he establishes in policy. Now, the rest of the Labour Party in Wales, save for Beth Winter, are a shower of shite. They are neoliberal Blairites. But Mark, I truly believe in our Lord and Savior Mark Drakeford, and I hope he can deliver something good. But I understand there's a lot of criticism of him. I know that, especially since the COVID pandemic started, the Communist Party in Wales have been coming on leaps and bounds. We've been having new applications every week. The Communist Party branch that I'm in has doubled in size since I joined a year ago in this branch. So it is a really positive time. If you're looking to get engaged with it, now would be the time, because you would be part of this new wave of people coming in, bringing in new ideas to the movement. And because we do operate on democratic centralism, your ideas, your ideas would obviously be just as valuable as everybody else's. So you have a chance to shape that new push into the movement.
Brilliant.
So if you're interested in Wales, or if you live here and you're interested in communism, we organise in your communities. So
shout out to the comrades in CPB and YCL. Get in there, comrades. Get in there. Hang out with Owen here. Have some fun. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry. I feel like we got distracted there, doing our little shout out to CPB and YCL.
Yeah, got a bit off track.
Yeah, struggle. Areas of struggle. National liberation struggle and labour struggle and all that sort of thing. Now, anything else that you wanted to add to that before we move forward?
I don't think there is much more to say. I think you get a pretty comprehensive look. Save for, I guess, in terms of the independence movement in Wales, historically, in the modern day, it's much more based around like where power is built. But historically, it's always been about preserving the language. And that's why the Liberal Party were always popular here, because they were always the party of the Welsh language. But then that also comes with caveats, because the Liberal Party being the party of the Welsh language means that when David Lloyd George becomes PM, the first and so far only Welsh Prime Minister of the UK, the policy he brings in to represent the Welsh people is to close Welsh pubs on Sundays, because that's what liberal chapel goers wanted. So you can really see the class alignment of the historic national struggle in Wales, which is something we'll come on to in a little bit.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, comrade. And yeah, thank you very much for this really comprehensive and thorough overview so far. It's been really, really interesting. And I know I have certainly learned a lot, and I've no doubt that our comrades in the audience have learned a lot too. So thank you very much for that. We are going to talk a little bit more in a moment about the comparison between the Irish national liberation struggle and the Welsh national liberation struggle. So that's going to be quite interesting. I think we might, expand on the bomb that was dropped earlier on in regard to LARPing and all that sort of thing. Just before we do that, we'll just answer one or two questions here. He had another question from Aaron. He asks, has immigration into Wales spurred any reactionary rhetoric? Nothing like the BJP, but even the BNP light, and then corrected to nothing like the BNP, but even BNP light. So, has immigration into Wales spurred any reactionary rhetoric?
I think there's a level of um, reactionary politics regarding immigration that we sort of saw towards the end of the 2000s, early 2010s. All of Britain had this big surge in like a growing resentment towards Eastern European immigration, and there was this greater sense that racism was growing. Um, but I don't think it really took hold as much in Wales, or at least in South Wales, in my experience. Rather, there seemed to be an acceptance that our communities have been built by immigration. There isn't a Welsh person in South Wales. There are people from all backgrounds. So my family is originally from Durham. My girlfriend has roots in Ireland. I have friends who are Italians or who are Eastern European. A huge amount.
Italians.
Italians were a huge thing in South Wales, especially. A lot of our like big brands were founded by Italians. My neighbors growing up were Italian, and they ran the like local Greasy Spoon cafe, and they did like baked goods and stuff in there. It was gorgeous.
I don't think I have many Italians in Ireland, actually. Interesting enough, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm not. I think the Italians primarily came over after 1920, trying to avoid Mussolini. So we got all the good Italians as well. We got the based Italians who were running away.
Class. All right, you got the good ones.
Oh yeah, and we also had big Jewish communities as well. I think we used to have a big synagogue, and there was a Jewish quarter in my hometown. Now there were race riots in the 1920s regarding like anti-Semitism. So it's never been easy. I'm not saying that like Wales has always been this progressive place, but it's always been a place where lots of people came and were able to make the living and absorb into the community. In Cardiff, there's a place called Tiger Bay, or it used to be called Tiger Bay. Now I think it's Mermaid Key or something. It's Cardiff Bay, and it used to be, and parts of it still are, this big area of the largely foreign community in Wales. You can't really put a pin in where they were from because they were from everywhere. Cardiff was a huge port. It was the biggest coal port in the world because we were exporting it all. So then sailors came to settle here. And that meant that we have this huge diverse community in the south of Cardiff that are all descendants from foreign immigrants who also married into Welsh families. So you have a lot of mixed race people. Glenn Jordan, who is a historian of Tiger Bay, suggests that like black people had were better off in Wales than they were in England because there was this greater sense of anti-coloniality and labor more than anything else. Obviously, there was still strife in those communities. But one example he gives was in Tiger Bay, there were marches that were done every year on Eid to celebrate something. I can't remember. It's something to do with Islam. If people who know Islam, tell me what Eid is about. And they had the Muslim community in Tiger Bay had this march every year, and they had flags out. And Jordan, who is this historian, asked the local imam one year, well, is this something you brought over from Yemen? Because there's a large Yemeni community in Cardiff. He said, no, just in the 1950s, we saw the Catholics having a march at Corpus Christi, and we thought that would be nice too. So there's this huge amount of like cultural mixing in Wales, and it is kind of Americanized only without the problem of being on stolen land like America is. We're like the morally okay America.
Oxymoron right there. Hang on. Interesting. Like kind of that melting pot, I suppose, when you're talking about like America.
Eid is the day Muhammad ascended to heaven. There you are. Now I've learned.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron, for enlightening us, educating us, edifying us. We appreciate that. Brilliant. There was a question from Sunflower Socialist, but it's kind of a funny one. But actually, Sunflower Socialist seems to have gone to the doctors now, so you don't actually need to answer this. But he did ask. I do need to ask, as someone who studied the Irish language a little, not a lot. I know Irish likes to use a lot of vowels, but what's up with Welsh and all the else? And geez, this sounds like a Seinfeld. Like the start of like a Seinfeld bit. And what's the deal with Welsh and all the L's and the G's?
Bears kill bees. Yeah, no. I'll answer just in case he comes back and watches it back later.
Yeah.
In Welsh, Y's and W's are also vowels. Y's are pronounced like I, and W's are pronounced like oo. So things that look like they have no vowels in them actually have a normal amount of vowels.
Hidden vowels.
Yeah,
Your Trojan horse and a lot of vowels in.
Yeah, it's got about the same amount of vowels as English, but we do also put a lot of letters together, like double L's are pronounced rather than l. So then you see that a lot as well.
Very good, thank you. I'm sure he'll be satisfied with that response if he watches this back later. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So, fucking larpers. Let's go for it. Let's go for this hot take.
Okay, so
well, let's frame this. Let's quickly frame this. How should we view comparisons between the Irish national liberation struggle and the Welsh national liberation struggle?
My answer would be, I think it takes someone who is Irish who understands what happened in Wales to kind of answer this, because otherwise it's like telling someone like in Kenya how they should view being colonized. But it's if I were Irish, I think I would find the comparison not insulting but pretty close, because the Welsh national struggle was never as pronounced as the national struggle in Ireland, and the oppression of Wales was never as brutal as the oppression of Ireland. That doesn't mean that we don't deserve self-determination, but it does mean that maybe we weren't a colony, and the only reason the language died was because of industrialization, English immigration, and Welsh not being taught in schools. So it died due to economic forces, whereas in Ireland you have laws against Irish up until the independence of Ireland. You have
never happened. Sorry. Anyway.
Partial independence of Ireland.
Also didn't happen, but anyway.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
for another day.
You're a semi-colony, is the Marxist parlance, I think.
Yeah.
Would semi-colony be what you embrace?
Well, I would say colony and semi-colony. I would say the 6 counties is still every bit a colony, still occupied.
Yeah, and the Republic is
semi-colony.
Is economically colonized.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But obviously, speaking Irish is no longer illegal. And the treatment of Irish people has always been historically worse than the treatment of Welsh people. Now, there was anti-Welsh prejudice, and people do still get up in arms every time there's a joke about Wales, although I think that's a bit over the top to some extent, because when this happens in the context of Ireland, I can understand it, because there is this active attempt to renounce colonialism and reject this, whereas I feel like in Wales there's been a political attempt to have our cake and eat it, where we want to be a colony, but we also want to celebrate everything that we did in the empire, and it always feels mixed to me. But the comparison there is, I wouldn't say Wales's national liberation struggle has been similar to Ireland since the Act of Union and the bringing together of Wales into England, really. Prior to that, we were a colony, we had revolts, there was segregation. Wales prior to the 1500s was kind of like the 6 counties were up until 1997 and arguably today, in that there were a lot fewer rights for Welsh speakers. But then after that, that isn't the case. So to act like we are still under that situation and compare ourselves to Ireland, I think is LARPing, which is why I thought the FWA were kind of LARPers. Partially because they didn't actually do anything. They claimed they did the bombings that the Mac actually did. They did marches and stuff, and they tried to look scary, but I don't think they actually undertook any actual bombing. And if they did, it is not well known. Whereas the Mac did undertake bombing. They had people who were in the British Army in them who knew how to create bombs, and they used it. Now, the FWA was led by Julian Caio Evans, who was not only in the army, but he was in the Malayan emergency and reveled in beheading communists. He was all about putting down the communist movement in Malaya, but then also wanted to project himself as like the national hero for Wales, like a Che Guevara figure, completely abstracted from the fact that he actively engaged in imperialism in Malaya. So I think they were LARPers, and I think Julian Caio Evans was a bit of a nutter, and just liked to run around the countryside with his friends with flags and guns.
That's hilarious. As for being insulted, I would say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. So no, it's very nice, even if it's not.
Oh, you're very welcome, man.
Oh, it is. It's nice. It's nice to hear that some people were inspired. Given that the IRA and stuff like that can be so divisive, and the Irish Republican struggle can be so divisive, and it can get so much shit from all over the world. That it's nice to know that some people were inspired and see solidarity with our struggle in a strange way, misguided, or even maybe misplaced, and maybe even if it was, as you said, like a little bit inappropriate. It's still kind of. It still kind of warms my heart, and I've seen a few of those. I've seen a few pictures of just these old lads just like running around the countryside like with these big massive like flags and stuff like that, and big red flags stuff like that, and well, yeah, warms the heart. Highest.
It's the thought that counts.
Thought that counts. Yeah. Definitely interesting. Definitely interesting. Like I said, I don't want to be too condescending, because like obviously there's, as you said, there were like real issues there historically. But I'm not in a position to say whether or not that's called for or warranted in these day and ages. And as you said, it's not even clear whether or not they actually did any of the bombings or the explosions or anything like that. Because you did talk about this sort of like physical force activity, but it doesn't seem to be the case that they were the ones who were involved in it. Do you know?
Yeah. If they were if they're claiming it, be about it. Like, if you're going to say that you're blowing things up, just blow things up. Like, if you're claiming it, you're probably going to get arrested anyway. There's no reason for you to not be blowing things up now.
Yep. Pylons, blow up a few pylons.
Yeah. Train track, a bit of pipe.
Yeah. Pipe, yeah, why not?
It does just seem like you're going down onto waste ground and you're blowing up what you find. Like, you're just like fucking around like kids.
Fuck that signpost. Yeah, it does seem kind of fun. Well, look, at least it seems like not too many people anyway got hurt. So yeah.
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, there was only one person who was actually injured, and that was in the Prince Charles bombing. Like, someone just found the bomb a few days later and got blown up, but I think they survived. They're okay.
Yeah, good.
But they just happened to have been blown up. So I mean, swings and roundabouts. You got a story out of it.
That's hilarious. Oh, brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm gonna have to refer people anytime they ask me about the Free Wales Army. I'm gonna have to refer them to this moment, because I can't in good faith just say they're a bunch of LARPers. That sounds so fucking
you need context. Yeah.
You definitely need a lot of context. Well, yeah, anyway, they showed solidarity with the Irish Republicans, so thank you to our comrades for that. Okay, brilliant, thank you very much. There's a few more questions in the chat here. Will we take a few of those?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Yeah, actually, we're sort of coming to the end. I think those are the main questions that we were going to address. So, and it's been over 2 hours, so we'll take a few more questions. If people have any questions for our comrades, put them into the chat there now, and we'll go through the Q&As now, and then we'll wrap things up in the next little while. Yeah. That sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I had a mouthful of drink.
I'm out of drink. I'm so disappointed. I've got an empty bottle of Heineken. I've got an empty bottle of vodka. I mean, it's just
March for the pint, man.
may as well
The
just
sorrow of a pint,
fucking,
man.
just fucking blow them up, I suppose.
You have nothing else to do with it.
Just blow them up. It's grand. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, there's a few different questions that I see in the chat here. I'll just take it back a little bit. Aaron asks, does Connolly figure in Welsh communism? Any James Connolly in Welsh communism?
Uh,
Tell me lies. Lie to me. If the answer's no, just lie to me.
in terms of literature, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of citing of Connolly. I think Gwynne Williams may have referenced him, but importantly,
Send it back.
figures like Arthur Horner went over to Ireland to volunteer with the ICA and the IRA and refused to serve in World War One and went to prison for it.
Extremely based.
He also became the leader of the National Union of Mine Workers in the 1950s. So he became pretty prominent as well.
Class. You love to hear it. Absolutely love to hear it. I hope that wasn't a lie either. I hope that wasn't.
No, that's true. There's a great deal of, when it comes to the left in Wales, there are a few crossovers between both the national struggle and the labour struggle. So you have people like Arthur Horner, who actively fought to liberate Ireland, and you have people like Nicholas E. Gleis, whose real name was T. Nicholas, but he took a bardic name because he was a poet and fancy, who was a Welsh speaker and promoted like Welsh independence, but was also a communist. And this is from the 1940s, I believe. So that tradition still existed, even if it was smaller. They felt a lot in common with the Irish struggle.
Brilliant. Absolutely love to hear it. Love to hear it. Thank you very much, comrade. I also want to say I see Ayobius, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, Ayobios in the chat there, who says solidarity from Palestine, comrades. Solidarity to Palestine, comrades. Great to have you here.
Yeah, from the river to the sea.
Absolutely. 100% solidarity to you and to the movement. Brilliant. Thank you very much. We'll answer a couple more questions. This is again from Aaron here as well. Is there an industrial proletariat and peasantry distinction anymore in Wales?
The people who own, I can't generalize. I think the farming in Wales is moving towards a mechanized model more similar to the US one, especially in areas like Powys. But in West Wales, like Ceredigion, there's still a lot of like small land holding, which is closer to, I suppose, like petty bourgeois or maybe proletarian, because the Welsh government offers grants to people who want to take up farming, because our like produce is a big thing that we make money from. So if you go to the supermarket, you'll probably get Welsh milk and cheese, and we make a lot of dairy. So there's still a sort of proletarian farming situation. In terms of industrial working class, there are still holdouts of big, heavy industry. Tata Steel across the bay from me, I can see it from my window, was one of the most modern steel works in the world in the 1960s. The whole area of Port Talbot was built for it. And you have oil refineries all the way down there, and they've been trying to mothball it, but the organized labor within it just won't let it happen. They're showing enough strength that the government hasn't been able to get rid of it yet. So that's been very good. And there are also lots of, basically every Welsh actor that you can name, or famous Welsh person, probably comes from Port Talbot. Michael Sheen comes from there, Richard Burton comes from there, I think Tom Jones comes from Port Talbot or nearby. Every famous Welsh person you ever knew comes from Port Talbot. And Michael Sheen has been involved in saving the works and saving the jobs as well. So there is still a holdout of that. Largely, though, we are moving towards a more service-oriented economy, which has meant a lot of growing pains for people who were born into a situation where they thought, okay, I'm going to train to become, I don't know, like a fitter or a welder in my local steelworks, and that's a job for life. I'm going to be here until I'm 60. I'm going to retire. I'm going to take my wife and kids on holiday once a year, and I'm going to have my house sorted, pay off my mortgage in 10 years. And that's been taken away from people, and that's where all this anger comes from, I think.
Understandably, yeah. Brilliant, thank you very much. There was a question earlier on that it seems that I missed. I didn't catch this earlier on, but Joaquin, or I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, asked what he thinks about the political and economic divide between the north and south of Wales.
It's definitely something that we need mending. I play hatred for Gogs, but I don't actually have a hate for anyone from North Wales. They just managed to hold on to the language, and I'm resentful. But I think the economic divide is intentional. There is the infrastructure in Wales, our railways, for example. Down south, there's a railway that runs from the border through Cardiff, through Swansea, and off to Carmarthen, and then it stops. And then there are chutes off that railway that go north up each valley. And the reason this railway exists is because it was meant for extracting coal to the coast or to the border so that the wealth could be taken out of Wales. The same thing exists in the north, and there was no economic reason for them to connect us both. So I think resentment has festered over time in that North Wales feels like it's isolated from power in the south of Wales because that's where our Senedd is. And South Wales feels like North Wales are getting uppity because we don't have much power here either. So I think it is an intentional attempt to divide and conquer. And the regional disparity is also intentional because it's meant to create that resentment. There's a reason why there is more investment in the South. It's because they put the capital here. There's a sense that this is where their base is when it comes to like labor, especially. And it keeps us invested in the union because if we can't see eye to eye with people who are Gogs and they can't see eye to eye with Hunters, then we aren't going to make any progress in that regard. So I think it was wholly intentional and a way of keeping Wales at least divided enough while we were still valuable. And now we're no longer valuable. We aren't providing coal to them anymore, so we're seen as a drain on resources.
Sad.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. Yeah, but that's the system we live in. Thank you very much. Another question here about Bolivia. Well, related to Bolivia, Microsoft Word technical support says, serious question, : what does the left in Wales feel about Bolivia and that model?
Certainly within the Communist Party, we've celebrated the return of MAS to power, and we support any attempt in the global South to resist imperialism. I feel like we're relatively united in the sense that social democracy in the global South, when it combats imperialism, is just as good as the establishment of the actual socialism in the global North. Because, especially for people who live in the global South, imperialism is the primary contradiction. So there is a sense within the Communist Party that, yes, they may not be revolutionary, they may not be following the model set out by Lenin and Stalin, but we afford them an altering support in the same way that we did for like Salvador Allende.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Very good comparison. Yeah. No, I don't know much. Obviously, well, look, it's difficult. I mean, the question is, what does the left in Wales feel about Bolivia and that model? But but I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, like, because like if you're in the West and you're talking about like social democracy, that has a very different implication to what it would have like in you said the global South, developing world, whatever you might want to call it. And yeah, there actually are. They can be quite radical, potentially even there are even like radical revolutionary social democrats, all across the global South, which is kind of a strange concept. But yeah, it's definitely worth supporting, certainly from an anti-imperialist perspective. So.
Yeah, you can. if you can acknowledge, especially in the global south, we can't be dismissing these people because largely they haven't had indigenous capitalism. We have the benefit of having that. If we had a socialist revolution tomorrow, we could institute actual Soviet-style socialism or adapt it to whatever material conditions we have. In the global south, they had purely extractive colonial capitalism. They haven't been able to build up those like indigenous resources that they need, that capitalism would afford them in the progress of history, because that has been used solely to extract. Which is why social democracy is important in the global south. If they can build like a contained capitalism and then move on, not to sound like a dangist, but they can be achieving socialism as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's progressive. Like it's progressive in terms of the historical movement. It is. It's definitely progressive, and it should definitely be supported as a progressive anti-imperialist movement. And yeah, absolutely. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we want here or where we are, wherever we are. But yeah, in that context, we can certainly support it. I suppose what I would say is the question is, about the model that Bolivia is following. Just keep in context everything that's been said with regard to it being part of like the global south. The model that's going to work in Bolivia might not be the model that's going to work in in Wales, might not be the model that's going to work in Russia in 1917, might not be the model that's going to work in different places. It's going to be different. Socialism emerges from the material conditions within which it finds itself. So yeah, just do keep that in mind. Just like we can't just superimpose that model onto anywhere else in the world and assume that that would be very, very progressive and necessarily the right way forward. So yeah, do keep that in mind.
Yeah, we should stress that only you know what your community needs.
Yep.
Like people from outside that area, they can comment on it, they can offer you advice, but you in your community know what the people on the ground are needing in that situation, and you know how progressed you are. So never malign yourself in comparison to larger movements, because you are an expert on your community.
Yep, absolutely. I do see some people in the chat there saying social democracy kind of cringe, bro. Yeah, social democracy is cringe, but look, different contexts, so on and so forth. It's not what I want in Ireland. It's certainly not my plan for Ireland. But yeah, and actually relating to that, going to another end of the spectrum, Aaron Lambiar asks, does it help to keep the violence of the past away from the communism of today to spread class consciousness?
I think if we are talking about 100 million dead, Mao executed every living person in China kind of thing, kind of, which is not the usual answer you get, I don't imagine, but I think talking about what happened in other countries is never as relevant as talking about what's happened in your own or countries like it. So, in the case of like you're going into your community, you were saying you were from the Communist Party. If people are saying, okay, I am a socialist, but I've heard however many people have died because of it, then you have to be responding by saying, okay, right, you were a socialist, you like this socialist figure. For instance, for us, it would be like Jeremy Corbyn. If you said, okay, you like Jeremy Corbyn, right? You agree that the media lied about his positions in order to demonize him and prevent him from gaining power. What do you think they would do with a socialist country that was a threat to their power abroad? And then from there, you can talk to them about what they need in their communities. So essentially, I think people tend to feel, at least in my own experiences, people tend to feel like discussion of foreign countries tends to be irrelevant. People seem to be more interested in what's happening at home. And if you can say, okay, right, you're paying 2/3 of your income to a landlord who has refused to do any maintenance on your house, what if we got rid of the position of landlords? We can be doing something about it. How can we be helping in your area? Then I think that does more to progress it than any like getting bogged down in, well, Mao didn't kill enough landlords actually kind of discussions.
Based. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and you approach it from a very, very interesting angle. I I have a lot of different thoughts on this particular topic.
Hmm.
Some of which I can speak openly about, and I suppose some others which I can't. I would be. How can I phrase this without getting myself into trouble? um, Revolution. If we're serious about revolution, we need to be serious about revolution. We need to seriously talk about what revolution entails. We can't sit around talking about how it's just going to be reform and everything's going to be friendly and the capitalists are just going to realize the errors of their ways, and they are just going to hand over the means of production and state power and all those sorts of things. So we do need to be realistic about these things. These are probably more advanced conversations to be having with people. You're not going to be knocking on doors, as you said, talking about how Mao needed to do more of that. But at the same time, like, we do need to be careful that we don't just fall into lying to people and sort of pretending that, like, we can actually really genuinely bring about socialism just through doing a little bit of work in the trade unions, or just doing, knocking on a few doors, handing out a few leaflets. At some point there will be some sort of clash. You will declare, there will be a general strike. If you're following the traditional Marxist-Leninist strategy, there will be many years of struggle in the legal realm. Then there will be a mass strike, will be called. There will be some sort of insurrection. Generally, the state will attack you, and you will need to defend yourself and your comrades and your class. And so it's not going to be completely, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not going to be like, there's just no way. There's no way that we can really achieve these things without revolution and what that entails. And I think that unfortunately a lot of people kind of shy away from that, and they don't really ever talk about it. And this causes confusion in a lot of organizations where they don't actually have a clear revolutionary strategy or a path forwards to genuinely actually bring it about. And I think that's a little bit of an issue. It is something that needs to be talked about and addressed to some degree, So I don't know. What do you want to give your thoughts on that before I land myself in prison or something like that?
I think a revolution is going to be inherently a violent process.
Yeah.
There are very few examples in history of bloodless revolutions, but I don't think if we are doing door knocking in whatever context we do door knocking, we don't say, "Are you looking to potentially die?" We present them a better future, and then if they want to die for it, then they'd be,
well, martyrs, I suppose.
But, I suppose if you were engaging in a revolution, if you're in a revolutionary party in the Imperial Core or in the Global South, to some extent you do take your life into your own hands. It's not a great likelihood that in like a Western country you will be killed directly. But we also have to stress, when we're talking about death and danger, that we're being socially murdered every day. There are people who are dying on the streets. There are people who die in their own homes for want of food. So it's not that we are putting ourselves in harm's way, it's that we are heightening danger for a potential future in which there is none at all.
Yes. Very, very well articulated. Far more eloquently than I was able to do so. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's kind of a survival situation, long-term kind of survival for our class. Because as you said, there's this slow violence being perpetrated against us at all times by the bourgeois state, and we don't always acknowledge that. We don't always acknowledge systemic violence. People dying on the streets due to homelessness because of landlords and stuff. We don't necessarily acknowledge that. We don't acknowledge people who can't afford to go to the doctor or whatever. Okay, maybe it's different, like in the UK with the NHS and stuff like that. But yeah. Anyway, that's what I would say. I don't want to fully shy away. I don't want to fully shy away from this conversation, because if nobody's having the conversation, if nobody's talking about these things, then it's never going to happen. People are going to start having these really petty bourgeois ideas of what revolution is. You have these liberals who are like, the revolution is love. You're just like, are you sure? Yeah, so we do need to keep the focus, eye on the prize, and the prize is dictatorship of the proletariat. It is working class power and working class control. So that's going to come at a cost, and yeah,
Yeah. But we also, I think we get people on board with the idea.
bit by
We
bit.
stress how much danger they're in already, because they already know. They know that if I don't work these hours, even when I'm exhausted, I won't have a house, and then I'm going to be out on the street, and it's going to be cold and dangerous, and I don't know where my meals are going to come from. So we need to sort of like ease into that discussion. Do you have another question lined up?
I don't have another. Ooh, I do see another one just there. Another one just popped in into the
Do
chat.
you mind taking an answer very quickly while I go for a slash? I will be 30 seconds if I can manage it.
You go ahead. You go have fun. I'll talk to our friends.
I'm gonna have
in
an
the chat
amazing time. I'll talk to you in a sec.
Okay. Jessica says exactly, Paul. The systemic violence on the proletariat. It's self-defense to fight back against it. Yes, absolutely. I can't answer Joaquin's. I think it's Joaquin anyway. I think that's the pronunciation. Does the lad see himself as British? Thoughts on the Communist Party of Britain's link with the Labour Party and the struggle to overcome the Labour Party in Wales, Britain? Well, we're gonna have to wait for our comrade to get back. Critical support for Mujahideen. I don't know that much. I'm not gonna say anything. Let me Google that. Let's see. Mujahideen. Let me see here. Is that? Yeah, I don't know enough about it to say anything about that. Maybe our comrade will know when he comes back. Martin Barkov says this was a great stream, really informative for the social and material conditions of Wales. Thank you very much for saying that. That's very kind of you to say. And I'm looking forward to having you on in a week or two. I think that'll be really interesting. And thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you for the great questions, by the way, Aaron. They were really, really interesting and really stimulating and really got us thinking and talking, and it was really useful. So thanks very much. I really do appreciate that. Thank you, Jesse, who says this is my first stream of yours, watching live, loving it. Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. And plenty more to come. There'll be another one on Saturday. On Saturday, we're going to be talking about the People's War in India. Actually, India, I'm thinking of CPI Maoist. No, it'll be in the Philippines, actually. CPP, MPA, which will be really, really interesting to talk about. Space Baby is going to be coming on, having a chat about that. So, yeah, I suppose that'll sort of present it'll continue the conversation we're having now, because these are people who are actually engaged in like serious revolutionary work. They're actually out there engaging in People's War. And yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about that on Saturday. So yeah, thank you very much. Did I hear you back there, Owain?
You did. I've returned from a very satisfactory piss.
Good. I hope you had fun. There was a question for you. Actually, the question that appeared on the screen was directly for you. So I just ended up going up on a rant with the comrades in the chat. But so Joaquin R asks, does the lad see himself as British? Thoughts on another question here from the same person. Thoughts on the Communist Party of Britain's link with the Labour Party and the struggle to overcome the Labour Party in Wales, Britain. Thoughts on that?
I see myself as Welsh primarily. But I think like my first identification would be working class or a communist. The links with the Labour Party, well, in terms of my thoughts on the CPB, I think they're the most advanced revolutionary party in the UK. That's why I'm part of them. In terms of the links with the Labour Party, I think that made sense. That definitely made sense with the Corbyn government, because the idea is to advance whatever would be best in the social conditions that we have. And in terms of best, not just for Britain, but also for like the world at large, Corbyn is a pretty committed anti-imperialist, whether he's a revolutionary socialist or not. That's kind of what set him apart from Bernie Sanders in the US. So I can understand advancing and supporting Corbyn so that at least areas of the world that are regularly imperialized by Britain get some level of respite from that. But obviously now we've distanced ourselves from the the Labour Party because of the new rightward lurch, and we will be running our own candidates, at least in the Welsh Senate elections, to promote ourselves.
Very cool. Thank you very much for that. Another question here, which I didn't have an answer to. Just a little quick one here from Juche Necromancer, who says, critical support for Mujahideen? Question mark. Do you have critical? I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure that's brilliant, but I actually don't know anything about this.
Depends on the Mujahideen. As I understand it, Mujahideen is sort of like a catch-all term for a militant organization in that region of the world.
Yeah, I'm seeing that, like a lot of guerrilla fighters and that. I'm checking it out here. I'm looking some stuff up online here.
Yeah.
So,
in terms of the Mujahideen to which Rambo was dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan. No, not solidarity with those Mujahideen, because I did to some extent support the socialist government of Afghanistan prior to the Taliban taking over the country. I suppose you could say critical support. Every time a Mujahideen fighter kills a US or a British soldier, I am happier for it. That is my take, and that I represent the party in that. I am willing to put my neck on the line and say the only good soldier is a dead soldier.
Is that a knock at your door? I think I heard something in the background there.
We will soon find out.
Thank you very much for knowing something about that question. That's helpful. Very good. Oh, now here's an interesting one here. Mongoose 00 Mongoose asks, Paul, how likely is? I think it's probably meant to be in here. How likely in the Western world, where even the proletariat are basically labor aristocracy, capable of revolting? What do you think? Revolution in the Western world? Likely?
I to some extent, I take the view that the underdeveloped nations of the world sort of represent a global proletariat, and it would take them overthrowing their regimes and opposing imperialism for imperial power to be weakened enough for it to be toppled. I don't think that's universally the case, and I don't think that obfuscates any Western leftists from organizing. I think the main takeaway is that, yeah, the global south is the place that will be most suitable for socialism to develop, because they are at the direct bottom of the pecking order, and to do that would be to topple imperialism entirely. Like, Britain couldn't maintain its public services without exploiting other nations. So in order to overthrow these regimes here, there is impetus on people in the global south to overthrow their own regimes and oppose imperialism, but I'm not waiting for those people to claim the freedom that they deserve. I'm organizing now, and if we can achieve something now, then I'm going for it. It's opportunism in the best possible sense.
That's a nice way of describing it. Great, thank you very much. Yeah, I like when we say like the West or whatever. I mean, like there's a lot of places in the West like what I think probably do have some potential for genuine revolution. Greece, I think there's a genuine revolutionary fervor building in Greece. I think that people should definitely be keeping an eye on that there. The KKE and their youth organization, they're doing some properly good work. I know, okay, whatever, they have some problematic lines on this and that, and that's they need to be addressed. But yeah, there is a serious potential for genuine revolution there. I think as well. I think that in Ireland as well, at some point in the coming decades, there will be potential for revolution as well. Depending, I suppose, on how cozy Ireland gets within the EU and stuff like that. But obviously, we're heading into many catastrophes. We're heading into, obviously we're sort of at the arse end of the COVID thing now. The vaccines are going to start being rolled out now, probably in the next few weeks to next year or two. So that's sort of come to an end. But I mean, like the economic toll of that is going to be like outrageous. Like we're going to be in like it's just going to be a really really bad recession. You know, it's going to be a catastrophe economically, and that's going to cause a lot of social unrest. It's going to cause a lot of problems, and I think that's probably where revolutionary ideas grow. You know, they absolutely will develop in such a context as that. You know, so yeah, look, let's watch this space. I think there is potential here. We can't be defeatists. We can't just say it's not going to happen. So we shouldn't bother our arses. We should just, I don't know, say that we support such and such a country in the global south and forget about all organising. As you said yourself, let's do what we can to organise here while we can. But it's probably a lot more likely that it will be happening in the global south first, and then we might see the sort of that to go back to the dominoes metaphor, then we'll probably see a lot more of that happening in the global north. So
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point as well in terms of like global recessions, especially within larger imperialist trading blocks. There's always a victim state. Like, doesn't Ireland hold something like 90% of EU debt?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're paying up like what is it, like I'm actually just thinking in terms of like the bank bailout. Actually, do you remember the bank bailout that happened
Yeah.
2010? I think it was after the 2008 crisis and that. I mean, like Irish people are paying over €8,000 for that. Each Irish person is paying over €8,000, whereas the average EU rate is like 200 euro. So and like most of that's just German private banking debt. Like so, it's it's kind of a fucking joke. Like, and I hope that people will sort of wake up to that. Like most people just don't realize that that's what's going on.
Yeah.
But hopefully we can sort of spread consciousness about that and do what we can. So yeah,
So you have like victim states like that. Like when there was the 2008 crisis, Ireland and Greece, and to some extent Spain and Italy as well,
pigs
got
they call them.
the yeah, get the pointy end of it.
Mm,
So there's a greater amount of revolutionary potential when the quiet cloak and dagger violence that we experience every day becomes a lot more pronounced and real when people are thrown out into the street. People see what happens when the people who are running the economy for themselves just cut their losses and run. So I think that is a time when there's especially a lot of revolutionary potential in Europe. Iceland is a good example because they actually did something about it. They
mm,
arrested the banking class, they broke up the banks. And
that's right.
ultimately, that is just what FDR did in the US after the Great Depression. But it's something. And it shows that there's potential for a mass movement to push an agenda. And if you can push the right agenda, you could see yourself establishing a socialist state in the imperial core
Mm.
and upending that whole system.
Well, let's hope. Fingers crossed. Let's hope. Let's push. Let's do what we can. Um, it will be great. I mean, like earlier on, you did mention about like if there was if there was a socialist revolution tomorrow in like the UK or something like that. Like imagine like with all the wealth and resources that are there, imagine what could be done. You know,
Yeah,
it's really crazy. Like because when you think of like a lot of socialist countries and a lot of actually existing socialist countries historically, and they were starting from like ground zero, from like just such difficult positions. And we often think of socialism and we think of like poverty and breadlines and it just struggle. But like imagine starting from a place of like wealth and plenty, and it could just be a potentially entirely different situation. And yeah, it would be interesting. I understand there's probably like a lot of like reparations and stuff like that that'll have to be dealt with if you are like, I don't know, if you did have like a socialist revolution in kind of an imperialist country. um I don't think that, for example, if there was a socialist revolution in France tomorrow, that they would continue to receive post-colonial taxes from like 14 countries in Africa. And I think they probably end up paying back a lot of that. But there's still going to be a lot of wealth there to go around, to be spread around, and you can do a lot with it. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, no amount of reparations is ever going to be more than we already spend on the countless imperialist wars
Yeah.
and the money that we just. Well, in Britain today, for example, when we made the track and trace system, they just gave the contract to a company that is friends with donors to the Tory party, and they gave it all the money they possibly could, and the app doesn't work. So
Mm.
it's just it's a Ponzi scheme. They found their friends and they were like, okay, here's our excuse to give you a whole bunch of money. Let's split it between us when I'm out of government, and that's what the Tory party's going to be doing.
Mm.
But the it's kind of off topic, but in terms of like Western social democratic states, I think we need to be more attentive to the intentions when they were created, because there is a lot of discussion of how, say, the NHS couldn't be built without colonial profit. Now,
Mm.
that is the case. However, Aneurin Bevan's intention when building the NHS were actually socialist. He said, I think it was during World War II, he was chided by a Tory minister suggesting that the Labour Party were planning on creating a Soviet planned economy. And he said, if the honourable minister is suggesting that I'm looking to create a planned economy of the Russia type, then my answer is emphatically yes. Like, there are people within the Labour Party, people, old school social democrats, who are genuinely interested in building socialism and ending an imperialist system, but don't have the reins of power. Like Clement Attlee was obviously an imperialist. Aneurin Bevan wasn't.
Mm.
And there are these factionalisms, especially within the Labour Party. I think Lenin particularly identified the Labour Party as different from the usual social democratic parties because it was based in the trade union movement.
Based.
So there certainly have been people in the Labour Party, like S.O. Davis, like Aneurin Bevan, like Jim Griffiths, who were anti-imperialist, who were actually socialist, and they were looking to bring it about through non-violent means. And while we may think that's wrong today, we can't necessarily say you were wrong for trying.
Mm. You know, it's actually a really interesting point, and you know, you sort of refer to classical social democrats, and like you need to remember, like that social kind of like was an adjective form of socialist, you know, back in the day, and it used to, like, it literally was. I mean, like old school social democrats wanted socialism. They wanted to get to socialism. They just had these, you know, reformists, utopian ideas of how that could come about, you know, and it just obviously wasn't scientific. It wasn't scientific socialism, but like they wanted socialism historically. It's a more of a recent kind of development, I suppose, where social democracy has become a thing in and of itself, just kind of left capitalism with a you know, strong social safety net and all this sorts of thing. But yeah, I mean, and I think that does sort of harken to a lot of the social democratic movements that you'll see in the global south as well. Like, I mean, MAS, I mean, it's social democratic, but like it does seem like they're actually trying to build socialism. You know, same with Venezuela as well, you know. So, you know, it's important to keep these things in mind, you know. When we think of like social democracy, we're probably thinking Norway, and we're just thinking basically using some socialistic programs to reinforce capitalism. But that's not always how it was conceived historically, and it doesn't seem to be how it's conceived in certain situations currently either, such as in, you know, Nicaragua, maybe Venezuela, a few different places in the global south, particularly in Latin America, you know. So
Yeah, and I think it's almost circling back to the original topic of like the discussion as well, that the NHS in the UK was built based on the model in Tredegar, which is the town directly to the west of my own. I could walk there, and that's where Aneurin Bevan was from, and it was built out of a trade union system where the workers would all chip in money, and then when they had, like, when someone had an injury, that could pay for their injuries then. So we need to be situating, especially the policies of the 1945 Labour government and the policies of Bevan in particular, not because I particularly like Bevan, I do, but because they come from a different place to the usual social democratic line that we also see in Latin America. They're quite similar in makeup, in that they're coming from a proletarian movement rather than a bourgeois one.
yeah.
Just like the NHS was founded on a proletarian policy rather than a bourgeois one.
Yeah, you know, I do think that's useful, just like drawing the line, saying like these are left social democrats rather than being right social democrats. You know, I think it is useful to sort of underscore that and to highlight that. So yeah, very good. Listen, thank you very much, Conrad. I really, really appreciate that. just before we go, do you want to do any plugs, shout outs, anyone? Anyone, anything? I mean, do you want to shout out the CPB or the YCL again, or anything else? Now's your chance to say whatever you want, to proclaim your love for whomever you want to the world, or whoever's watching this now. Now's your chance. Anything else, anything more that you'd like to say? Just go for it.
Yeah, sure. If you live anywhere on the island of Britain, then you're watching this stream, you obviously have an interest in socialism. Why aren't you already part of the CPB and the YCL? We can be organizing in your communities. You have unique insight that can help us organize in your community. And there is probably a problem that you face, that your family face, that your friends face, that we aren't addressing. And we need you to tell us about it, and we can work to fix that on the ground. We're not looking to get into power before we can do this. We're not going to be making promises and saying that we're going to be addressing your points. We're going to listen to you. We're going to plan out a system with your help, and then we're going to go out into your community and we're going to fix it with you. And that is how we're going to be operating. So if you see that there are problems in your community and you want them fixed, the best possible way to do it is to join the CPB or the YCL and organize through that. However, if you don't like the CPB or the YCL, Communist Party of Britain or the Young Communist League, then do mass work through another way. You can do it through your local Labour Party branch, if they're that way inclined. You can do it through any other number of, I suppose, Trotskyist parties or anarchist groups.
Okay, a little bit more tolerance for the anarchist groups. But
You could be doing it with friends from your pub or a church.
hey, there you go.
What I'm saying is that if you have an aversion to the Communist Party of Britain specifically, then it is absolutely fine for you to organize with anybody else so long as they can address the problem. What I'm saying, though, is that the Communist Party of Britain and the Young Communist League are the best suited because we have a Marxist line, we have people in your community, and we are the largest revolutionary communist party in the UK. If you are in the 6 counties, despite the fact you are still wrongfully in the UK, you should be joining the Communist Party of Ireland and the Connolly Youth Movement. Basically, join a party. And also, if my girlfriend's still watching, hello, thank you for keeping up with me this whole time and putting up with my Marxist tirades. I'm going to wait for you to correct me on a bunch of things when I get off this because you know far more about Celtic history than I do.
Class, thank you very much. Brilliant stuff. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Owain. That was brilliant. I'll do a quick shout out to the people in the chat here before we fully wrap things up. Thanks so much, Socialist Swan, Democratic Centralism, Lee Flex, ZV, Juju Necromancer, Domino Kristova, Papichulo, Martin Barakov. We Need Critical Thinking. Who else can I see here? Sassy ZB, Joaquim R, Aaron, of course, was asking questions earlier, Jesse, Sydney Rika, Papichulo, and to all the other comrades in the chat. Thank you so much for sticking around. Comrade, thank you so much for taking some time out of your evening this evening. It's been a few more hours. We had planned, of course, to go on for 1 hour, then it went to 2 hours. We're approaching 3 hours, so yeah, really really appreciate you explaining all this stuff, especially in so much detail, keeping it also interesting and entertaining throughout the whole way through, as well as answering questions from our comrades in the chat here as well. So thank you very much for doing that. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you very much to everybody who stuck around with us. We'll be back on Saturday to be talking about what's going on in the Philippines, the People's War with the Communist Party of the Philippines and the NPA. Cheers, everyone. Take care. I don't know any good way of finishing these things. I never do. I always have to ask the guests. So I'm the worst host. I swear to God. A host, that's like the minimum thing that a host should have. Like a snappy ending or something like that. Do you have any good ways of ending this? Can you think of any good ways? I mean, you can even think, like, if you've watched any of these to the end, what was the best one?
I don't think I've ever watched... Right. I don't actually watch your streams. Rather, I put them on in the background and then I play games. So I listen to your streams. But yeah, I suppose. Good night, comrades. Nostar Cymraeg.
That works. That works. I still really like the solidarity, comrades.
Make it a thing. You can bring it back. Sing in Welsh is one of the. Right, okay. Paul, sing in Welsh.
Easy peasy with my mastery of Welsh language now from this
Do you know
this
Men of
stream.
Harlech? We can get it going. We can do it in a round.
Maybe I'm singing the wrong song there, but
No, that's not Men of Harlech.
all right, let's end it. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Have a good one, and